There was a moment, in the dim haze of a sleepless night, when the relentless hum of my old city life was replaced by a distant, almost imperceptible murmur, a whisper that seemed to come from the very soul of the mountains. I had never planned on leaving behind the clamor of investigative journalism and the neon glow of endless deadlines. Yet something in the murmur of that wind-swept darkness called to me. Before I knew it, I found myself on a winding back road leading deep into the heart of the Pocono Mountains, far removed from the incessant noise of urban existence. My name is Jessica Hart, and I had always prided myself on chasing down secrets and exposing hidden truths, but nothing could have prepared me for the mystery that was waiting in these quiet, ancient woods. I arrived at our new haven, a dilapidated cabin tucked away on a ridge overlooking a valley blanketed by fog and pine, at the very moment when dusk was surrendering to night. The cabin, with its peeling siding and creaking wooden porch, exuded a certain forlorn charm, as if it were a relic left behind by time itself. My partner, Derek, who had accompanied me on this impulsive escape from city life, eyed the structure with a mixture of trepidation and resigned acceptance. He was a practical soul, a man whose skepticism had always tempered my more adventurous impulses. Our friend Allison, a soft-spoken herbalist whose knowledge of folklore and natural remedies ran as deep as the roots of the old pines, had joined us for reasons both personal and mystical. In many ways, our small band was a study in contrasts. I, ever the relentless seeker of truth; Derek, cautious and pragmatic; and Allison, whose intuitive grasp of nature's secrets lent an almost otherworldly perspective to our endeavor. The first night was a surreal tapestry of new sounds and sensations. I recall lying awake on a lumpy cot in the sparsely furnished living area, listening to the wind as it danced among the trees, carrying with it strange echoes that reminded me of half-remembered conversations. The silence was profound, yet broken by subtle hints of something else, a whisper here, a gentle rustling there, that made my skin prickle. I couldn't tell if it was merely the natural chorus of nocturnal creatures or something more sinister, a voice from the past that had not yet found its rest. Even as the fire in the old cast-iron stove crackled its steady song, there was an undeniable undercurrent of tension in the darkness, as though the forest itself were speaking in a language older than words. Derek, who had slept fitfully, was the first to remark on the oddities. One early morning, as we sat around a rickety table sipping bitter coffee from mismatched mugs, he leaned in close and said, "Jess, I swear I heard someone laughing last night. It wasn't like any bird call I know. It sounded human, somehow." I dismissed it at first, attributing his comment to the fog of exhaustion and the uncanny stillness of the mountains. But Allison's quiet, knowing smile and the distant look in her eyes told me that she, too, had felt that unplaceable chill of the night. Over the following days, we set about establishing our new life with a mixture of excitement and a growing sense of foreboding. I spent my mornings hiking along narrow trails that wound between towering hemlocks and maples, gathering details and sensations that I intended to weave into my next big story, a book that would explore the local mysteries of these storied mountains. The crisp air, rich with the scent of pine resin and damp earth, was intoxicating in its purity. Yet, even in the beauty of sunrise and the gentle murmur of streams cascading over rocky outcrops, there lurked an undercurrent of unease that I couldn't quite shake. The isolation, which had seemed so promising at first, revealed itself to be a double-edged sword. With every step away from the cabin, I became acutely aware of how deeply the past clung to these woods. I discovered weathered stone markers in hidden clearings, remnants of old logging camps and perhaps even older, lost settlements. In one such clearing, I stumbled upon an old, rusted tin box buried beneath a carpet of fallen leaves. Inside, Yellowed letters and brittle photographs hinted at lives once lived here, a history of joy, sorrow, and secrets best left undisturbed. I took them with me, determined to piece together the story. But even as I catalogued the faded words and images, I felt as if unseen eyes were watching me, tracking my every move with silent vigilance. That first week, as the days turned into nights filled with an ever-deepening fog, the unsettling signs began in earnest. It started with the voices, faint, barely audible murmurings that seemed to echo from the very walls of the forest. I was out on a solo walk one twilight when I distinctly heard a snippet of conversation, a hushed phrase, perhaps a name, carried on the breeze as if by a ghost. I paused and listened, but the words dissolved into the rustle of the trees. At the cabin, Derek and I began to note strange sounds, a child's giggle echoing in the distance, a soft hum that we could almost swear was reciting an old lullaby. Allison, whose familiarity with local lore was second to none, explained in a hushed tone that these phenomena were not uncommon in the Poconos. "There are tales," she said one evening as we gathered around the fire, "of spirits wandering these woods, restless souls caught between worlds, echoing the laughter of children long gone, and the sorrow of those who met untimely ends." Her words, delivered with a quiet certainty, made my investigative instincts tingle with anticipation. I started to document everything, every unexplained sound, every shadow that moved where no one should be. With my old digital recorder in hand, I took nightly walks around the perimeter of our property. On one such outing, the cold of the night air was punctuated by a sudden burst of soft, eerie laughter that seemed to come from nowhere. I remember my heart pounding as I swung the recorder around, trying to pinpoint the source. The forest, dense with ancient trees and gnarled undergrowth, swallowed the sound almost immediately, leaving me with a disquiet I couldn't ignore. Later that night, I listened back to the recording. There it was, a series of whispered giggles layered over what sounded like a melancholic sigh. I felt a thrill of both fear and curiosity. Was it possible that the stories Allison mentioned were more than mere folklore? Was there truly a presence in these woods that defied explanation? As the days passed, the evidence mounted. Derek, ever the voice of caution, grew increasingly uneasy. While I was drawn to the mystery like a moth to a flame, he began to insist that we consider the practicalities, repairing the leaky roof, securing the aging stove, stocking up on supplies before winter set in. "Jess, I get it," he said one chilly morning as we sipped coffee on the sagging porch. "But sometimes I wonder if chasing ghosts is worth risking what we have here." I tried to reassure him, explaining that I wasn't chasing phantoms for the sake of thrill, but to understand the history and heartbeat of this place. Still, his eyes reflected a silent dread that I couldn't dismiss. Allison, for her part, was a soothing presence. Her days were spent foraging for wild herbs and reading aloud passages from old folklore books that she had inherited from her grandmother. One afternoon, as we sat in the warm glow of a makeshift kitchen lit by a single lantern, she told us a tale that sent shivers down my spine. "They say," she began softly, "that the Poconos were once a sacred ground, a place where nature and spirit intertwined. In days long past, before modern men claimed these forests, a tribe once lived here, and they believed that the voices of their ancestors still whispered among the pines. Some even believe that the echoes you hear are not the wind at all, but the calls of those who never left." Her eyes shone with the conviction of someone who had spent countless hours immersed in the lore of the land. I found myself scribbling notes furiously, the seeds of a new chapter in my book taking root in my mind. One crisp evening, after a particularly long day of exploring forgotten trails and hidden clearings, I was drawn to a clearing on the far side of our property, where the moonlight filtered through the canopy in silvery beams. I set my recorder down and sat on a fallen log, letting the quiet of the night wash over me. That's when I heard it. A clear, single word whispered on the wind. Hannah. It was as if someone were calling my name, or perhaps the name of someone lost long ago. The sound was so distinct that I nearly dropped the recorder. I sat frozen, listening intently, my mind racing with possibilities. I couldn't recall anyone named Hannah in my own past, yet the name resonated with an ancient, mournful familiarity. Over the next few nights, the same word echoed intermittently through the forest, sometimes layered with soft laughter, other times with a sorrowful sigh that made the hair on my arms stand on end. I began to wonder if the name was tied to one of the faded letters or photographs I had found in that tin box on my first day here, a relic of a forgotten story that I was only beginning to piece together. I spent hours poring over those delicate, yellowed pages, searching for clues. The letters were written in a spidery hand and told of a young woman named Hannah, whose life had been marked by tragedy and whispered promises of escape. The more I read, the more I felt a connection to this long-departed soul, a sense that her story was somehow intertwined with the murmurs of the forest and the echo of that single, haunting word. That realization set me on a course that I could no longer turn from. I resolved to uncover Hannah's story, to piece together the fragments of history that seemed to call out to me from the depths of the past. I spent long hours at the local library in a nearby town, poring over old newspapers and historical records. I met with aging locals, people whose eyes held the memories of a time when the forest was alive with traditions and rituals now lost to modernity. They spoke in soft voices of strange occurrences in the woods, of lights and voices that had been seen and heard by those brave enough to wander after dark. One elderly man told me, "The woods remember, Miss Hart. They remember every sorrow, every joy, every secret, and sometimes they speak to us in voices of those who are gone." His words, delivered with a mixture of reverence and resignation, echoed in my mind long after I left. Even as I delved deeper into the lore, the supernatural events continued unabated. One stormy night, while Derek slept fitfully in a makeshift bed on the back porch, I ventured out alone to record the sounds of the tempest. The wind was a wild, howling beast, and the rain fell in relentless sheets. Amid the cacophony, I distinctly heard a gentle, rhythmic humming, a lullaby that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. I pressed my back against the rough bark of an old oak, my recorder capturing the haunting melody. For a moment, I felt as though I were on the threshold of some great revelation, a secret that lay hidden beneath the roar of the storm and the whisper of the trees. Derek confronted me the next morning, his expression a mixture of concern and irritation. "Jess, what were you doing out there in that weather? You're not exactly built for chasing ghosts, you know," he said, half joking, though his tone betrayed his worry. I tried to explain that I felt compelled to listen, to let the forest speak its truth to me. He sighed, shaking his head, but I saw in his eyes a flicker of understanding, and a silent plea that I not push too far into the unknown. In the weeks that followed, the puzzle of Hannah and the strange phenomena in the woods began to converge in my mind. Allison's gentle wisdom and deep knowledge of herbal lore proved invaluable. One afternoon, as we gathered wild chamomile and yarrow near a bubbling stream, she confided, "There's a tradition among some of the old mountain tribes to honor the dead by leaving small offerings, a sprig of rosemary, a bit of bread, at the places where the veil between this world and the next is thin. Perhaps what you're hearing, those whispers and that name, are a call for remembrance." Her words, simple yet profound, struck a chord within me. I started to leave small tokens, a pressed flower here, a handwritten note there, near the base of particularly ancient trees, as if to reach out to Hannah's restless spirit. The more I engaged with these rituals, the more I felt a subtle shift within myself. My initial, almost feverish quest to unravel a supernatural mystery began to give way to something gentler, a deep, empathetic connection with a soul long lost and the timeless landscape that cradled her memory. I found that in acknowledging the pain and beauty of the past, I was also healing parts of myself that had been neglected in the relentless pace of my former life. One crisp, clear morning, as the first light of dawn filtered through a blanket of mist, I returned to the clearing where I had first heard the whispered name. With my recorder, my journal, and a small bouquet of wildflowers clutched in my hand, I stepped into the pale glow of early day. The silence was profound, broken only by the gentle murmur of a nearby stream and the soft rustling of leaves. I sat on a weathered log and closed my eyes, breathing in the cool, moist air, and waited. Minutes passed in a meditative stillness, and then, almost imperceptibly, I heard it again, a clear, solitary whisper, "Hannah." This time, there was no layering of laughter or sorrow, just the pure, unadorned call, as if the forest had finally decided to speak plainly. I opened my eyes slowly, and, for a moment, I fancied I saw a flicker of movement among the ferns, a delicate, transient shape that might have been a memory of a face. I recorded every sound, every nuance, and when I later listened back, the clarity of that single word resonated like a promise. In the midst of all this, Derek's apprehension had grown. One late afternoon, as the sun sank low and painted the valley in hues of deep amber, he and I sat on the porch in a heavy silence. "Jess, I'm starting to think you're in too deep," he murmured, his eyes searching mine. "I know you believe in what you're doing, but sometimes I worry that chasing ghosts isn't worth the cost." I reached over and squeezed his hand, understanding his fear even as it clashed with my own fervor. "I'm not chasing ghosts," I replied softly. "I'm trying to listen to the stories the forest has to tell. I feel like there's something important here, a truth that's been waiting for me to uncover, not just about Hannah, but about myself, about what it means to remember and to heal." He nodded slowly, and though the worry lingered in his eyes, there was a glimmer of acceptance, an unspoken vow to stand by me, even if his heart quivered in the dark. As autumn deepened, the spectral occurrences took on a bittersweet quality. I began to integrate my experiences into my writing, pouring raw, unfiltered emotion onto paper as I worked on the book that had driven me here. Each chapter was a tapestry woven from first-hand encounters, historical fragments, and the intangible sense of loss that permeated the forest. My narrative grew less about sensational discoveries and more about understanding, the delicate interplay between memory and myth, between the tangible present and the elusive past. I shared my progress with Allison, who encouraged me to honor not just the eerie details, but the humanity behind them. "Every whisper you capture," she said one afternoon as we sat amid bundles of dried herbs, "is a reminder that the past is not dead. It lives on in the stories we tell, in the rituals we keep, in the souls of those who are forgotten." One chilly evening, as a soft drizzle turned the world into a shimmering blur of light and shadow, I found myself alone on the porch once more. The fire in the stove was low, casting long, wavering shadows across the wooden floor, and the wind carried with it the muted symphony of the forest. I pulled out my journal and began to write, not just about the events of the day, but about the emotions, the gentle sorrow, the flicker of hope, the quiet resilience of a spirit that refused to be silenced. In that reflective solitude, I realized that my journey here had become as much an internal pilgrimage as it was an investigation into the supernatural. The whispers of the forest were urging me to confront my own past, lost loves, missed opportunities, the weight of unspoken regrets, and, in doing so, to find a way to heal. One particular night stands out vividly now. It was the night after a violent thunderstorm had left the world washed in silver light and the scent of ozone, when the forest seemed to exhale a long-held secret. I had returned to the clearing, my recorder and journal clutched tightly in my hands, and sat on the familiar log. The air was still, charged with anticipation, and then I heard it, a clear, resonant whisper that rose above the quiet murmur of the trees. "Hannah," it said, not as a question, but as a solemn declaration. In that moment, I felt an overwhelming surge of empathy, as if the spirit of a long-departed soul had reached out to share her pain and her hope. I closed my eyes, allowing the sound to wash over me, and for a brief, transcendent moment, I understood that this was not a haunting in the traditional sense. It was a call for remembrance, a plea for healing from a past that had been buried in the annals of time. I returned to the cabin that night with a new sense of purpose. Over the following days, I integrated the rituals of remembrance into my daily routine. I arranged small memorials, a single candle here, a sprig of rosemary there, at the base of the ancient trees that seemed to stand as silent sentinels over the valley. I reached out to local historians and elder residents, piecing together fragments of stories that spoke of a young woman named Hannah, whose life had been cut tragically short by circumstances that were now lost to time. Each account, though tinged with sorrow and mystery, added layers to the portrait of a person I had never met, but whose spirit felt intimately entwined with the landscape. Derek, though still anxious about the unknown, began to show a reluctant appreciation for the depth of my commitment. One crisp morning, as the first frost of winter painted the valley in delicate silver filigree, he and I sat together on the porch, watching as the mist curled around the trees. "Maybe you're right," he said softly, breaking the silence. "Maybe there's something here that we can't just explain away with logic and caution. Maybe it's something that needs to be felt, remembered, and honored." His words, simple and unadorned, resonated deeply within me. I knew then that while I might never fully dispel the mysteries that haunted these woods, I had the strength to stand firm in my resolve, to honor both the spirit of Hannah and the part of me that had finally found solace in the quiet depths of the Poconos. As the weeks melted into the early days of winter, I watched as the forest transformed under the gentle caress of frost and the quiet brilliance of clear, starry nights. The eerie voices and soft laughter receded into a delicate background murmur, a reminder that the supernatural was not an incessant terror, but a subtle, persistent echo of lives long past. I continued my work on the book, each page imbued with the raw emotions of discovery and introspection. My narrative was no longer simply an account of ghostly phenomena. It had evolved into a meditation on memory, loss, and the redemptive power of empathy. In the final stretch of that first transformative season, I found myself on a solitary walk through a glen where the trees arched overhead like a cathedral of nature. The silence was profound, broken only by the crunch of frost underfoot and the occasional, almost imperceptible rustle of leaves. As I paused to take in the serene beauty of the moment, I felt a gentle breeze, warm and laden with the scent of pine and distant earth. In that whisper of wind, I heard unmistakably the word Hannah, not as a ghostly echo of fear, but as a tender benediction, a promise that the memory of the lost would live on in every rustling branch and every beam of soft winter light. It was in that moment of quiet epiphany that I understood my journey had reached a turning point. I no longer felt the urgent need to unearth every mystery, but rather a deep, abiding commitment to honor the stories of the past, to allow their bittersweet echoes to guide me into a future where the pain of loss was balanced by the beauty of remembrance. Derek's support never wavered, even as he sometimes questioned the wisdom of my relentless pursuit of these spectral truths. Allison, too, continued to share her quiet insights and herbal lore, reminding me that nature herself was a vast, living repository of memory, a place where every stone, every leaf, and every whisper of wind was imbued with the essence of those who had once lived and loved here. Together, we forged a fragile peace between the tangible world and the realm of whispered legends. Now, as I sit by the small, steady glow of a fire in that old cabin, Penning down the final pages of this chapter of my life, I feel a deep gratitude for the journey that brought me here. The Poconos, with their timeless forests and echoing voices, have taught me that true understanding comes not from the sterile clarity of facts alone, but from the messy, unpredictable interplay of memory, myth, and the human heart. I have learned that the ghosts we chase are not always malevolent. Sometimes they are simply voices lost in time, calling out for recognition and healing. I choose to remain in this place not because I am unafraid, but because I have discovered a purpose that transcends the boundaries of fear. The cabin, the forest, the quiet murmur of forgotten names on the wind, all of these have become part of me, woven into the tapestry of my soul like threads of sorrow and hope. And as I continue to document the stories of these ancient woods, I carry with me the gentle promise of Hannah, a reminder that every whisper in the dark is a testament to lives that still linger in the soft, eternal embrace of nature. This is my account, a record of the journey from the blinding lights of the city to the quiet, mysterious depths of the Poconos. It is a story of rediscovery, of confronting the unseen forces that dwell in the spaces between memory and myth, and of ultimately finding peace in the acknowledgement that some secrets are meant to remain whispered on the wind. And so, with every breath of crisp mountain air, I honor the past and welcome the promise of tomorrow, ever listening for the soft call of the woods, ever determined to let the voices of the lost guide me home. The day I first stepped off the bus and into the crisp, biting air of Vermont's Green Mountains, I sensed that I had arrived at the very edge of a new life, a life that would demand more from me than I had ever dared to imagine. I am Liam Turner, a retired high school teacher whose heart was still raw from a recent, devastating loss. My beloved wife, Marianne, had passed away only a year ago, leaving behind a quiet, unfillable void in both my days and my dreams. In a desperate bid to reclaim some semblance of hope and to provide solace for my perceptive teenage daughter, Sophie, I had chosen to leave behind the familiar hum of suburban monotony and embrace the isolation of a secluded log cabin nestled deep in these rugged mountains. The cabin itself was an austere structure, its weather-beaten logs and low-pitched roof speaking of a time when every man and woman understood the uncompromising demands of nature. I remember the first time I laid eyes on it, a modest, unadorned dwelling set against a backdrop of towering pines and frosted ridges, with a small, overgrown garden that hinted at long-forgotten efforts to tame the wild. Despite its obvious shortcomings, a leaky window here, a creaking porch there, it promised something I could not quite articulate, a chance to start anew, to let the cold, raw beauty of the mountains heal my battered soul. Our arrival, however, was immediately tempered by the reality of the mountain's indifference. The very next morning, as I unwrapped a steaming mug of coffee and stepped onto the wooden porch, a chill, not entirely due to the winter air, slipped down my spine. There was an inexplicable draft that seemed to emanate from nowhere, an icy whisper that brushed against my skin and left me unsettled. I dismissed it as the natural quirk of an old building in a harsh climate, but as the day wore on, little things began to unsettle the quiet routine I had so desperately craved. It started with a series of delicate, almost imperceptible footprints in the freshly fallen snow near the hearth. I discovered them one early afternoon when I was checking on the firewood pile, small, childlike impressions that seemed too deliberate to belong to any animal native to these woods. I traced their path with my gloved fingers, noting how they veered unexpectedly, and then disappeared into a thicket of snow-laden evergreens. At first, I thought perhaps a local child had wandered near our property, but no such evidence presented itself. The surrounding area was as remote as it was silent, and Sophie, who had been at school, had no recollection of any playful excursion near the cabin. That evening, as dusk fell over the mountains and the sky transformed into a canvas of deep indigo and silver, I sat by the dwindling embers of the stove with Sophie in our small, sparsely furnished living area. The silence was heavy with unspoken grief and the weight of loss, but it was punctuated by something else, a distant, sorrowful murmur that seemed to float on the wind, as if the pines themselves were sighing with ancient melancholy. Sophie, her eyes red from a restless night filled with unsettling dreams, glanced up at me with a question in them I dared not voice aloud. I offered a reassuring smile, though internally I wrestled with a growing disquiet. It was as if these mountains were keeping secrets, murmuring in voices that echoed with the pain and the history of a time long past. The days that followed were an intricate tapestry of daily survival and quiet investigation. I set about reinforcing the cabin as best as I could, patching up leaks, scrubbing away the persistent mold that crept along the windowsills, and repairing the aging off-grid power system that groaned under the weight of relentless winter storms. Every gust of wind seemed to batter the walls, and every sudden shift in temperature sent a shiver through the corridors of my memory. Amid these practical challenges, however, I began to notice other, subtler signs of the unknown. One late afternoon, while I was walking along a narrow, snow-dusted trail that curved behind the cabin, I heard a sound, a faint, ethereal whisper that might have been mistaken for the rustle of wind through brittle leaves. I paused, heart in my throat, straining to catch every syllable, but the words were lost as quickly as they had come. I could not shake the feeling that someone, or something, was speaking to me in a language older than time, a language woven from sorrow and longing. At night, when the world outside was reduced to a silvery monochrome of snow and shadows, Sophie began to speak of recurring nightmares. In her dreams, she saw a figure, a ghostly, childlike presence wandering through endless forests of frost and shadow. In these dreams, the figure sometimes whispered to her, calling her name in a voice that was both gentle and despairing. Sophie's eyes would open wide in the darkness, and she would cling to me as if seeking protection from a terror she could not fully explain. I, too, began to be troubled by my own sleep, plagued by the memory of a soft voice that called Liam, on a night when the wind was particularly cold. At first I dismissed it as grief incarnate, the echo of my own longing for Marianne, but as the nights wore on, the murmurs grew in persistence and clarity. Desperate for answers, I began to explore local folklore, spending long hours poring over dusty tomes at the small public library in the nearest town. I discovered that the Green Mountains, for all their breathtaking beauty, were steeped in legends of vengeful spirits and cursed souls. Many of the older residents spoke in hushed tones about unexplained cold drafts inside old cabins, about the spirits of children who had perished in tragedies long forgotten, and about mournful voices that haunted the winter nights. One story, in particular, sent a chill through me, the tale of a young girl named Eliza, who had vanished one harsh winter, leaving behind only her small footprints in the snow near a family hearth. The locals said that her spirit, tormented by a sense of abandonment and unfulfilled promise, still wandered the woods, her soft voice carried on the wind, as a lament for what once was. I mentioned these findings to Sophie one chilly evening as we sat together by the fire, our breath mingling with the smoke in the small room. "Maybe it's not just our imagination," she said softly, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and wonder. "Maybe the mountains really do remember." I squeezed her hand, determined to be her shield against the encroaching darkness, even as I felt my own resolve waver under the weight of the inexplicable. In the following weeks, as winter deepened its grip on the mountains, the strange occurrences became more insistent. One night, as a blizzard raged outside and the wind howled like a wounded beast, I was awakened by the unmistakable sound of a child's laughter echoing faintly through the icy corridors of the cabin. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, listening to the laughter, clear and bittersweet, then fading into silence. The next morning, I discovered that the footprints I had once found near the hearth were now accompanied by small, fragile drawings etched into the frost on the window, a series of crudely drawn figures and symbols that I could not decipher. I showed them to Sophie, and though she recoiled slightly, her eyes shone with the intensity of someone who believed in the mysteries that defied easy explanation. Determined to protect our fragile sanctuary from what seemed to be a relentless intrusion of the spectral past, I resolved to perform simple protective rituals. Drawing on the folklore I had studied and the quiet wisdom of local traditions, I began to mark the boundaries of our cabin with circles of salt, a practice said to ward off restless spirits. Each evening, before dark, I would step outside with a small bag of coarse salt, carefully sprinkling it around the perimeter of our property, murmuring soft prayers that had once been taught to me in childhood. Sophie watched with a mix of curiosity and trepidation, her eyes wide as she absorbed every word. In those moments, I felt as though I were drawing a line between the tangible world of ice and snow and the intangible realm of memory and ghostly voices. Even as these rituals offered a measure of solace, the sense of isolation and foreboding pressed in on me. The winter storms grew more ferocious, battering the cabin with icy rain and frigid winds that crept through even the best sealed corners. Our off-grid power system faltered under the strain, leaving us in darkness on more than one occasion. In the quiet that followed each outage, the silence seemed to magnify every creak, every whispered sound, until the cabin itself felt like a living thing, a creature with a heartbeat of wood and glass. I would lie awake at night, Sophie's steady breathing a soft counterpoint to the unseen forces outside, and wonder if the ghosts of these mountains were merely figments of a grieving mind, or real echoes of a past that refused to die. One particularly harrowing night, when the snow fell so thickly that even the trees appeared to be buried beneath a quilt of white, I awoke to the sound of a door creaking open. I sat bolt upright in the darkness, my heart hammering as I strained to listen. The sound was soft, almost tentative, yet it carried with it a weight of intent. I reached for the flashlight on my bedside table and crept silently toward the living area. There, in the glow of the beam, I saw the outline of a small figure at the threshold, a silhouette, delicate and fragile, like that of a child. I called out softly, "Hello," but the figure did not move. In a surge of both fear and compassion, I stepped forward, and in that moment, the figure vanished into the swirling shadows of the storm. I felt a cold emptiness in the pit of my stomach, as if I had just brushed against the void, and I knew that something in these mountains was reaching out from beyond. The next morning, as the storm subsided and a pale sun struggled to break through a veil of lingering clouds, I found Sophie sitting at the kitchen table with tear-streaked cheeks. She recounted a vivid dream, a nightmare in which she saw the ghost of a small girl, her eyes filled with sorrow, beckoning her to follow into the depths of a dark forest. The girl's face, though blurred and indistinct, carried an air of profound loss that left Sophie trembling even as she spoke. I held her close, my own grief mingling with her fear, and reassured her with a gentle promise that we would face whatever came together. In the weeks that followed, our small family, myself and Sophie, became increasingly united against the encroaching mystery. I reached out to a local historian at a community center in a nearby town, someone who had spent years cataloging the stories and legends of the Green Mountains. Over several long evenings, he recounted tales of lost souls, of tragic events that had left indelible marks on the land, and of a particular young girl named Eliza, whose ghost was said to roam the forests on bitter winter nights. His stories, delivered in a soft, measured tone, were both fascinating and heartbreaking, and I began to suspect that the strange events at our cabin were linked to this deeper, hidden history. Armed with this new perspective, I found myself compelled to document every detail of our experience. Each night, after the protective rituals were performed, and Sophie had finally succumbed to fitful sleep, I would sit at a battered desk by the window and write. I recorded the sounds of the wind, the precise timing of unexplained footsteps on the snow, the fleeting glimpses of pale light that danced just beyond the reach of the fire's glow. I wrote of the cold drafts that crept unexpectedly through the cabin, of the inexplicable laughter that sometimes echoed in the halls, and of the gentle, persistent murmur of a name, sometimes Eliza, sometimes another name altogether, whispered on the wind. The act of writing became both an exorcism of my own lingering grief and a quest for truth that might bring meaning to the spectral disturbances that had invaded our lives. Sophie, though still burdened by her nightmares, began to express a quiet determination to understand the mystery in her own way. She took to sketching what she saw in her dreams, delicate, sorrowful images of a ghostly child wandering through endless forests of frost, her eyes filled with an otherworldly longing. Her drawings, raw and unfiltered, captured the essence of the fear and the beauty of the unknown, and they became a silent dialogue between her inner world and the harsh reality of our isolation. We would sit together in the evenings, our conversations a blend of gentle reassurances and shared wonder, as we tried to piece together the fragments of a story that seemed as ancient as the mountains themselves. Despite the increasing occurrences of strange phenomena, I found that the Green Mountains also held a transformative beauty. In the quiet moments of early dawn, when the snow glistened like a field of diamonds and the cold air filled my lungs with a sharp clarity, I felt a sense of renewal, a promise that, even in the midst of darkness and loss, life continued in its own relentless, beautiful way. The stark contrasts of these highlands, the frozen stillness of a winter morning, the sudden roar of a storm breaking over the peaks, the soft murmur of pines whispering secrets, began to weave themselves into the tapestry of my new life, a tapestry that was both painful and profoundly healing. There were times, during particularly long and bitter nights, when I questioned whether I had made the right choice. The isolation was profound, and the echoes of loss, my own and those seemingly left behind by the mountains, were inescapable. Derek's occasional phone calls from the town, though warm and familiar, reminded me of the life I had left behind. A life where the boundaries between reality and memory were less blurred by the relentless passage of time. Yet, each time I looked into Sophie's determined eyes, I knew that I had to forge ahead, not just for myself, but for her, who was slowly learning to navigate the delicate interplay of grief and hope in this unfamiliar, wild landscape. As winter deepened into early spring, the relentless cold began to yield to the promise of thawing days. The snow that had once blanketed the cabin and the surrounding forest slowly receded, revealing mossy stones and ancient tree roots that had lain hidden beneath the icy surface. With the change in season, the supernatural disturbances took on a quieter, more wistful tone. The eerie murmurs grew softer, as if the spirits that had once roamed in restless agitation were now finding solace in the gentle warmth of the emerging sun. I began to believe that, in our own way, Sophie and I were not so different from those lost souls. We too were in search of healing, of reconciliation with the past, and of a future where the shadows of grief could be transformed into the light of remembrance. One late afternoon, as a gentle rain began to fall and the mountains were bathed in a soft, diffused light, Sophie and I sat together on the porch, wrapped in blankets and lost in quiet conversation. She looked at me with eyes that were both mature beyond her years and tender with the weight of her own experiences. "Dad," she said softly, "I think the mountains are trying to tell us something. Maybe it's not about chasing away the ghosts, but about understanding them." Her words, simple yet profound, struck a deep chord within me. In that moment, I realized that our journey in these green mountains was not merely an attempt to escape the past, but a quest to come to terms with it, to honor the memories of those we had lost and to allow them to guide us toward a new beginning. With renewed determination, I began to integrate the lessons of the land into my daily life. I continued my nightly writings, now interwoven with reflections on memory, resilience, and the delicate balance between sorrow and joy. I started attending small gatherings in the nearby town, where locals shared their own stories of strange occurrences and whispered legends about the spirits of the mountains. Each story, told in hushed tones over cups of steaming coffee, added a new layer to the tapestry of the Green Mountains, a tapestry that was as much about healing as it was about haunting. In time, the strange happenings around the cabin did not vanish entirely, but they became a part of the natural rhythm of life here, a subtle, persistent presence that, rather than instill fear, served as a reminder of the deep history etched into every rock and tree. I no longer heard the unsettling voices with the same intensity as before. Instead, they became a quiet undercurrent, like the distant murmur of a long-forgotten lullaby. Sophie's nightmares, while still vivid, gradually transformed from scenes of terror into bittersweet visions of loss and eventual peace. I came to view them not as curses, but as expressions of a lingering grief that, when acknowledged, could be gently soothed. Now, as I sit by a modest wood stove on an early spring evening, the last light of day filtered through frosted windows, casting long, wavering shadows on the walls, I reflect on the journey that brought me here. The Green Mountains, with their harsh winters, relentless storms, and profound silence, have taught me that healing is not a matter of erasing the past, but of learning to live with its echoes. Each unexplained footprint, every cold draft that slips through the cracks of the old cabin, and every soft murmur carried by the pines is a testament to lives once lived, to memories that persist beyond our own fragile existence. I have come to understand that the supernatural is not something to be banished by force, but rather something to be acknowledged and respected, a part of the natural order that, like the seasons, follows its own mysterious logic. In embracing the shadows over these mountains, I have found a measure of peace, a way to honor the memory of my beloved Mary Ann, and to help Sophie and me build a future where hope is nurtured even in the midst of sorrow. I choose to remain here in these rugged, ancient lands, not because I am unafraid, but because I have learned that in the quiet acceptance of the unknown lies a strength that transcends fear. This is my account, a journey from the depths of personal loss to a tentative yet profound reconciliation with the mysteries of the natural world. It is a story of the Green Mountains, where every gust of wind, every whisper of the pines, and every faint footprint in the snow is a chapter in an ongoing narrative of grief and healing, of memory and hope. In these mountains, I have discovered that the past is never truly gone. It lives on in the echoes of voices, in the patterns of frost on old wooden beams, and in the quiet determination of a father and daughter determined to find light amid the darkness. As I write these final words, the soft glow of the fading day mingles with the gentle promise of tomorrow, and I feel a deep gratitude for the path I have chosen. The shadows over the Green Mountains are not something to be feared, but something to be understood, a part of life's intricate tapestry that, in its own mysterious way, offers us the chance to learn, to grieve, and ultimately to heal. And so I remain here, in this sanctuary of frost and memory, listening to the quiet voices of the past and allowing them to guide me gently toward a future where even the darkest nights eventually give way to the soft light of a new day. I was not sure when the Blue Ridge began to change me. Perhaps it was in the very first unexpected moment, when I found myself drawn off the beaten path by a melody that no human should ever sing. One early autumn afternoon, I wandered away from the modest, off-grid cabin I had rented with my longtime friend Rosa, a gentle soul whose intuition seemed as ancient as the mountains themselves. I recall the sky was overcast with a heavy, gauzy mist, and the ground, carpeted with crisp leaves, muffled my every step. I was following a sound, a soft, lilting hum that seemed to drift on the breeze through the towering pines, when I first sensed that something was deeply, inexplicably different here. My name is Evelyn Price, and I have always believed that the most extraordinary stories hide in the quiet corners of the world. I left the chaos of city life, along with the clamor of modern distractions, to seek refuge in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, a place of raw beauty and ancient mystery. I came with an aching need for solitude to nurture my writing, hoping that the natural world would help me reconnect with parts of myself I had long buried under busy days and restless nights. I was determined to discover stories that were not just facts, but living echoes of memory and myth. I hoped that in these hills I might capture the elusive interplay of light and shadow, the whisper of leaves in the wind, and the murmur of secrets left behind by those who had come before. The cabin, a humble structure built of weathered timber and stone, clung to the edge of a dense forest where the trees stood like silent sentinels. Each morning, I awoke to the soft light of dawn filtering through the canopy, igniting dew-dappled ferns and casting long, gentle shadows across the rough-hewn floors. Rosa had chosen this place for its promise of healing. Her quiet spirituality and intuitive understanding of the land often led her to murmur words of thanks to the ancient spirits of the forest. Together, we embarked on daily journeys through the winding trails, notebooks and sketchpads in hand, intent on capturing the essence of the landscape. I scribbled down details, the way mist curled around gnarled branches, the subtle interplay of hues in the early light, even the faint, almost imperceptible traces of an old language carved into weathered bark. Every step, every observation, seemed to weave me deeper into a tapestry of secrets that had waited centuries to be told. It was on one of those solitary walks that I discovered something that both thrilled and chilled me. As I strolled beside a babbling mountain stream, the water singing over smooth stones, I noticed a series of delicate markings etched into the trunk of an ancient oak. The carvings were not random. They resembled a kind of script, reminiscent of symbols I had seen in obscure folklore texts, but imbued with a quality that made them seem almost alive. The markings shimmered faintly in the diffuse light, as if touched by a spectral hand, and I ran my fingers over the grooves with reverence and trepidation. For a moment, I felt that the tree itself was whispering a long-forgotten tale, a lament, perhaps, of a sorrow that had seeped into the very heart of these mountains. I snapped several photos and made frantic notes in my journal, my pulse quickening as I wondered what force had left such a message. Was it the work of a solitary wanderer long ago, or something more mystical, a signal from a presence that lingered in the realm between this world and the next? That evening, as the sky deepened into a rich tapestry of indigo and violet, Rosa and I prepared ourselves for the night. We arranged a small circle of flickering candles around the cabin, their delicate flames creating a barrier of light against the encroaching darkness. We sat together on the creaking porch, our voices soft as we chanted incantations passed down in whispered tradition. The night air was cool and heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth, and it was in that charged silence that I first heard it, a clear, sorrowful humming that seemed to rise from the forest floor. The sound was not loud. Rather, it was as if the wind itself carried the faint strains of a lullaby, a melody that spoke of loss and longing in a language older than words. I felt an inexplicable pull to follow it, to let the song guide me into the depths of the forest, even though every instinct urged caution. Rosa squeezed my hand gently, her eyes conveying both concern and a quiet understanding that the land had begun to speak to us in its own secret tongue. In the days that followed, the supernatural hints became both more frequent and more elusive. At dusk, when the world seemed to shift into a realm of half light and half shadow, I would catch fleeting glimpses of movement at the edge of my vision, a figure that flitted just beyond the trees, its form ambiguous and insubstantial. Once, as I sat by the window watching the twilight dance on the dew-laden leaves, I saw what I thought was a face, a pale, sorrowful countenance peering out from behind an ancient oak. I blinked, and the vision was gone, leaving me to wonder if it had been a trick of the fading light or the gentle manifestation of a spirit long tethered to the land. I began to record these moments in my journal, detailing not just what I saw but how it made me feel, the inexplicable mix of terror and tender empathy, as though the very essence of grief were reaching out to me from the dark. Rosa's insights deepened with each passing day. While I approached these experiences with a writer's curiosity, she treated them as undeniable evidence of the unseen. "The Blue Ridge holds memories, Evelyn," she would say softly as we sat together on the porch under a sky dappled with stars. "Every whisper of wind, every rustle in the trees is a message from those who came before. They linger here, not to haunt us, but to remind us of a time when the boundaries between the living and the remembered were as thin as the morning mist." Her words were both comforting and unsettling, a reminder that the land was not empty but teeming with the echoes of a rich, if painful, past. My own research, fueled by a desire to capture the raw truth of my experiences, led me to delve into local legends and old manuscripts at a small historical society in a nearby town. I pored over dusty volumes that recounted tales of tragic lives and lost souls, stories of a spectral child, perhaps a wronged spirit, who had wandered these mountains for centuries, her laughter and tears interwoven with the very fabric of the forest. I learned of rituals once performed by the native peoples to honor the dead, of prayers recited by settlers to appease the restless spirits of the land. One story, in particular, recounted the tragic fate of a young girl named Lena, whose life had been snuffed out in a cruel winter, leaving behind nothing but a series of whispered laments carried on the wind. The more I read, the more I felt an uncanny resonance with the experiences I was having, an intuition that the spectral presences I encountered were not malicious intrusions, but echoes of a deep, abiding sorrow that the mountains had cradled through the ages. One night stands apart from the rest, a night when the veil between the visible and the unseen seemed impossibly thin. I had spent the day wandering a particularly rugged trail with Rosa, who, as always, walked quietly beside me with eyes that seemed to read the language of the forest. That evening, after returning to the cabin, I sat by a small fire that roared in the stone hearth. The wind outside was fierce, and the rain lashed against the windows, blurring the line between the world inside and the chaotic tempest beyond. In that moment of turbulent beauty, I heard a clear, resonant whisper carried on the wind, a single word that pierced the din of the storm. "Lena." The voice was neither malevolent nor gentle. It was a sound imbued with profound longing, as if a heart had cried out from a vast, unfathomable distance. I sat transfixed, the word echoing in my ears, each repetition a delicate plea that stirred the deepest corners of my memory and imagination. Unable to resist, I rose and stepped out into the storm, my heart pounding as I walked toward the sound. The rain drenched me, each drop cold and insistent, yet I felt a strange warmth, a sense that I was being guided by something ancient and kind. I made my way along a narrow path illuminated intermittently by flashes of lightning, my eyes straining to see through the sheets of water. In a small clearing, I saw her, a faint, ephemeral figure of a young girl, her form barely visible in the tempest. Her eyes, luminous and sorrowful, met mine, and in that gaze I felt the weight of centuries of loneliness and longing. For what seemed like an eternity, we stood there in silence, the raging storm around us a stark contrast to the stillness of that moment. I extended my hand, and though I knew it might pass right through her, I felt a cool, insubstantial touch, like a whisper of a memory. Then, as suddenly as she had appeared, she faded into the darkness, leaving me with a lingering ache and a profound sense of connection. In the days that followed, I found myself both haunted and comforted by the presence of Lena. My writing took on a new urgency as I began to record every detail of these encounters, every nuance of sound and light that hinted at the spectral child's presence. I wrote of the soft laughter that sometimes echoed in the early hours, of the faint imprints left in the dew on the cabin's windows, imprints that resembled delicate handprints, too small to be those of an adult. I wrote of the moments when the forest itself seemed to hold its breath, when the very air was thick with a silence that spoke of deep, unspoken sorrow. Each word I penned was an attempt to capture the ineffable, a mosaic of emotion and memory that I hoped might someday be understood. Rosa and I continued our nightly vigils, blending ancient rituals with our own quiet meditations. We would sit on the porch as the moon rose high above the blue ridge, its silvery light casting long, delicate shadows across the landscape, with soft incantations and the gentle rustle of leaves as our accompaniment. We would perform rituals of remembrance, sprinkling water from a carved stone bowl, laying down small tokens, wildflowers, smooth pebbles, strands of hair, to honor the spirit of Lena and to invite healing into our lives. These ceremonies, simple and heartfelt, became a bridge between my creative soul and the spectral echoes of the land. Yet, even as I embraced the mystery of Lena, I could not help but feel the pull of both fear and hope. There were nights when I would wake suddenly from a fitful sleep, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in terror at the thought that the spectral presence might be reaching out to reclaim something I held dear. I would find myself in a state of quiet awe, overwhelmed by the beauty and melancholy of the encounter, as if the boundaries between past and present, between life and memory, were dissolving into the cool night air. I learned to accept that these encounters, however unsettling, were not to be battled with brute force or dismissed as mere illusions. They were part of the living, breathing narrative of this ancient land, a narrative that, like my own, was filled with loss, hope, and the possibility of renewal. As autumn slowly gave way to the first hints of winter, I sensed a shift in the atmosphere. The spectral manifestations of Lena became less abrupt, more like gentle reminders that drifted through the stillness of early morning. The harshness of the cold seemed to temper the wild energies of the forest, softening the eerie echoes into a quiet, persistent murmur. I began to see these subtle presences as a part of the landscape's own cycle of grief and healing, an endless interplay between light and shadow, sorrow and redemption. I grew to understand that the Blue Ridge Mountains were not merely a setting for ghostly apparitions, but a living repository of memory, where every rock and tree held a story, every gust of wind carried a secret. In the quiet moments before dawn, I would sit on the weathered porch, wrapped in a thick shawl, and listen intently to the murmurs of the forest. I no longer felt the sharp sting of fear, but rather a gentle, persistent yearning, a call to remember, to honor, and ultimately to let go. I wrote long, reflective passages in my journal, pouring out my thoughts and emotions as if trying to capture the ephemeral essence of that spectral presence. My pages filled with descriptions of the moonlit glens, the whispering pines, and the soft interplay of shadow and light that defined this mystical corner of the world. I came to see my writing not as a search for a definitive truth, but as a way to connect with the past, and to create a space where memory and myth could coexist harmoniously. Sophie, who had been both my constant reminder of vulnerability and my source of strength, grew more reflective with each passing day. Despite the lingering traces of her own nightmares, she began to speak of the gentle beauty she sensed in the forest, the way that, sometimes, the laughter of a ghost could be as tender as a cherished memory. "It's like she's trying to tell us something," she would say softly, her eyes reflecting a wisdom beyond her years. In those moments, I realized that our encounters with Lena were not solely about confronting the supernatural. They were about acknowledging that pain and loss were an intrinsic part of life, and that by facing them with compassion, we might find the strength to heal. Now, as I sit in the soft light of an early winter morning, with frost tracing delicate patterns on the window and the distant hum of the Blue Ridge filling the silence, I feel an enduring sense of peace. The spectral presence of Lena, once a source of overwhelming fear, has transformed into a quiet, persistent companion, a gentle reminder that even in the depths of sorrow, there lies the possibility of renewal. Rosa and I continue our daily rituals, our conversations a blend of whispered prayers and shared reflections on the mysteries of the land. My writing, too, has taken on a new form, a meditative chronicle of the interplay between memory and myth, of the way the past can illuminate the present with its tender, bittersweet glow. I no longer see the ghostly encounters as intrusions or threats, but as invitations, an invitation to listen, to remember, and ultimately to let go. I have learned that the Blue Ridge Mountains, with their ancient pines and craggy ridges, hold within them a deep reservoir of sorrow and beauty, a living tapestry of voices that continue to whisper long after their owners have passed. In that understanding, I have found my calling, not as a seeker of sensational truths, but as a gentle chronicler of life's most delicate, mysterious moments. This is my account, a journey from the restless, uncertain days of a hopeful novelist to a place where the boundaries between the living and the lost blur into a soft, eternal melody. I came to the Blue Ridge in search of solitude and inspiration, and I found something far more profound, a communion with the past, a deep empathy for the ghosts who wander these mountains, and a realization that healing often comes in the quiet acceptance of mystery. Each day, as I pen my thoughts by the light of a flickering candle and listen to the rustle of ancient pines outside, I feel a renewed connection to the land and to those spectral voices that have, in their own tender way, guided me toward understanding. I choose to remain here, amidst the soft echoes of forgotten dreams and the gentle murmur of the Blue Ridge, not because I am unafraid, but because I have learned that true courage lies in embracing the unknown with an open heart. My writing, like the timeless landscape around me, is a tapestry woven from both sorrow and hope, a testament to the enduring beauty that emerges when we dare to listen to the whispers of the past. And so, with every breath of crisp mountain air, I honor the memory of those who have gone before, and I welcome the promise of tomorrow, a promise that even the darkest nights eventually give way to the soft, luminous glow of a new dawn. This is my story, a tale of loss and renewal, of spectral echoes and quiet resilience, set against the timeless backdrop of the Blue Ridge Mountains. It is a journey of transformation, where every ghostly laughter, every fleeting shadow, and every tender whisper has taught me that the line between memory and myth is not a barrier to be feared, but a bridge that can lead us gently home. The first time I felt the weight of the Allegheny on my shoulders wasn't during a formal ceremony or on a crisp parade ground. It was on a bitter, bone-chilling winter night, when the wind howled like an enraged spirit across a barren clearing, and I found myself questioning every choice that had led me here. My name is Daniel Reed, and after years in the military, haunted by memories of orders, battles, and the endless echoing void of loss, I sought refuge from the clamor of urban life by retreating into the depths of the Allegheny National Forest. I never imagined that the forest would offer me both a sanctuary and a relentless curse, a spectral reminder of my own inner demons, and that the ghosts I'd hoped to leave behind in the city might find new life among these ancient pines. I arrived at the cabin on a day when the sky was a leaden blanket, heavy with the promise of snow. The structure was modest and weather-beaten, a haphazard collection of rough-hewn logs, and a roof sagging under the burden of years, much like my own tired shoulders. It sat in a clearing, seemingly abandoned by time, yet with an unsettling presence that hinted at stories long buried beneath layers of moss and memory. I wasn't alone in this venture. Marcus, a no-nonsense survivalist, whose grizzled face and steady gaze spoke of decades spent learning the ways of the wild, had accompanied me, along with Lily, a soft-spoken local historian, whose quiet reverence for the land was matched only by her determination to unearth its secrets. Together, we hoped to build something new from the ashes of our pasts, even if the forest had other plans. The first night in the cabin was a disorienting blend of isolation and inexplicable echoes. I had been wrestling with insomnia since my arrival, my mind too accustomed to the relentless cadence of military drills to settle into the slow, meandering rhythm of wilderness life. As I lay in the creaking bed, the silence was broken not by the familiar buzz of a TV or the hum of a refrigerator, but by a series of ghostly whispers that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the cabin. At first, I convinced myself that it was nothing more than the wind sneaking through cracks in the weathered wood. But as the hours wore on, the voices took on a distinctly articulate quality, almost as if someone were reciting forgotten commands in a language that stirred memories of my former life. I sat bolt upright, heart pounding in a mix of dread and an old soldier's curiosity, trying to rationalize the sounds. Marcus, ever the skeptic, dismissed them as mere acoustics in an old building. Yet, even as he scoffed, I could see a flicker of unease cross his eyes, a sign that perhaps the forest was not so easily tamed by logic and survival skills. In the days that followed, our routine became a relentless struggle against both the elements and the persistent sense that we were not alone. Winter in the Alleghenies was unforgiving. I spent long hours repairing the cabin, sealing gaps in the logs, reinforcing the brittle frame with salvaged wood, and laboring over the off-grid heating system that sputtered weakly against the biting cold. Marcus and I would trek into the surrounding woods to gather firewood, our breaths forming ghostly clouds in the frigid air, all the while noting the strange, almost rhythmic pattern in the wind. It was as if the forest itself were speaking in measured cadences, a language of creaks and sighs that I struggled to decipher. Then, subtle signs began to emerge that defied any explanation based solely on nature. One early morning, after a particularly fierce snowstorm had left the landscape transformed into a shimmering expanse of white, I discovered a series of markings carved into the trunk of an ancient oak near the edge of the property. The symbols were crudely etched, as if by an unsteady hand, yet there was a deliberate precision to them. Lines that intertwined in a pattern I recognized from the obscure military insignia of a unit I had once served in. The discovery sent a shiver down my spine, not because I believed a fellow soldier had somehow taken refuge here, but because the symbols seemed imbued with a power that transcended mere graffiti. I took photographs and made sketches in my battered notebook, my thoughts swirling with a mix of nostalgia and dread. Was it possible that remnants of my past had been conjured into being by the forest itself? Or were these marks a sign of something far older, a curse woven into the fabric of these ancient trees? That same evening, while I sat with Marcus and Lily around a small, sputtering wood stove, the wind outside grew eerily still, and, in the oppressive quiet, a series of ghostly commands echoed faintly through the room. I could swear I heard fragments of military jargon, a series of terse orders and names that stirred memories of long-forgotten missions. Lily's eyes widened as she listened, and even Marcus, whose voice usually carried the weight of certainty, fell silent. We exchanged uncertain glances, the air thick with unspoken questions. I tried to brush it off as my own mind playing tricks on me, a lingering echo of a past I had hoped to leave behind. But deep down, I knew that the forest was stirring something that could not be easily dismissed. As the nights passed, the supernatural phenomena intensified. One frigid night, while the wind battered the cabin and the temperature dropped to a level that seemed almost impossible to bear, I was roused from a fitful sleep by the unmistakable sound of footsteps on the wooden floor. I bolted upright, fumbling for the small flashlight I kept on my bedside table, and crept out into the main room. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing nothing out of the ordinary. No intruder, no movement, but the echo of those steps lingered in the still air like an accusation. I felt a deep, gnawing certainty that I was being watched, that something unseen was moving in the periphery of our small sanctuary. Marcus later insisted that it might have been the natural expansion and contraction of the old wood in the cold, but the anxiety in his eyes betrayed a shared, unspoken fear. In an effort to confront these disquieting signs, I resolved to document everything in meticulous detail. Every unusual sound, every flicker of shadow, every carved symbol was recorded in my journal, its pages becoming a chronicle of both the physical and the metaphysical. I took to nightly walks with a digital recorder in hand, my breath visible in the icy air as I moved slowly along the perimeter of the property. In those solitary treks, I listened for anything that might shed light on the strange voices, whispers that sometimes seemed to merge with the howl of the wind, murmurs that carried the weight of centuries. I often found myself pausing at the base of towering trees, their bark rough and ancient beneath my fingertips, wondering if they, too, held memories of battles long past and tragedies forgotten. One particularly long night, when the cold was so intense that even the stars seemed to flicker and waver in the frigid sky, I ventured deeper into the forest than I ever had before. The path was unmarked and treacherous, illuminated only by the weak beam of my flashlight and the intermittent flash of lightning that split the sky. I walked with a soldier's discipline, every step measured, every sound analyzed, yet I could not shake the feeling that I was treading upon sacred ground, a place where the veil between the living and the lost was perilously thin. In a small clearing, I came upon a circle of standing stones, their surfaces etched with symbols that glowed faintly in the phosphorescent light of the storm. The sight was both mesmerizing and terrifying, as if I had stumbled upon an ancient altar, a site of rituals that had been performed by those who worshipped the mysteries of life and death. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, absorbing the silent energy of the place until the storm subsided and I was left alone with the echo of my own heartbeat. Upon my return to the cabin, I found Lily waiting in the entryway, her eyes alight with a mix of curiosity and concern. "Daniel, I've been researching local legends," she said softly, ushering me into the cramped, book-lined room that served as our makeshift study. "There's a curse here, a story that has haunted these woods for generations. They say that a great tragedy occurred long ago, one that bound the souls of those lost to the forest, and that the echoes you hear, the voices that seem to call out in the dead of night, are the remnants of that sorrow." Her words, delivered with quiet conviction, resonated with something deep inside me, a stirring of emotions I had long tried to bury beneath the regimented discipline of my former life. I listened intently as she recounted the tale of a soldier who had perished under mysterious circumstances during a long-forgotten conflict, his final orders now said to echo eternally through the Allegheny. The notion that my own past might somehow be entwined with the curse of these woods filled me with a disquiet I could neither dismiss nor fully comprehend. Marcus, ever the pragmatic survivalist, suggested that we set up a night watch and install additional cameras around the property to capture any further anomalies. Though his approach was rooted in cold logic and years of living off the grid, I sensed that even he was not immune to the strange happenings. That night, as we took turns patrolling the darkened perimeter, I found myself gripping my recorder so tightly that my knuckles turned white, every sound amplified by the silence of the snow-covered forest. It wasn't long before the whispering began anew, a soft, almost mechanical cadence that sounded eerily like a series of orders, disjointed yet unmistakably deliberate. I recorded the sequence, my mind racing with memories of past missions and the ghosts of orders that had once meant life or death. When I played it back, I could almost discern fragments of names and numbers, remnants of a life that I had once known all too well. Days merged into restless nights, and the supernatural manifestations became part of our daily routine. I found that my journal was filling with not just descriptions of ghostly commands and mysterious carvings, but also with reflections on my own internal battles, memories of missions, of loss, and of the haunting sense of responsibility that had driven me into the wilderness. I began to realize that the curse of the Allegheny was not solely a product of ancient tragedy, but also a mirror of my own inner turmoil, a persistent reminder that some wounds, once inflicted, never truly heal. In that reflection, I saw the faces of my fallen comrades, heard the echoes of orders that had once sent shivers down my spine, and felt the weight of a duty that had been both my salvation and my damnation. One night, after a particularly harrowing patrol in which the wind howled like a chorus of tormented souls, and the temperature dropped to levels that left our breath visible in the darkness, I stood alone on the porch. The silence was almost oppressive, punctuated only by the low murmur of distant voices that seemed to arise from the very earth beneath me. I closed my eyes and listened, not with the analytical detachment of a soldier, but with the raw, aching need for understanding. I heard a single, clear command repeated over and over, a name, a number, so faint that it almost melted into the ambient sound of the storm. And in that moment, I felt as though the curse had reached out to me, binding my fate to the spectral echoes of the forest. I realized that if I were to break free of this cycle of haunting and regret, I would need to confront not only the curse itself, but the demons that had driven me from the life I once knew. I began to compile every piece of evidence, the carved symbols, the whispered orders, the fleeting images captured on our cameras, into a coherent narrative, a testament to the enduring power of memory and the inexorable pull of the past. Lily's research became my anchor, her insights into local lore weaving together with my own fragmented recollections of military discipline and lost camaraderie. Together, we pieced together a story of betrayal, sacrifice, and an unyielding curse that had been cast upon these woods long ago. The more I learned, the more I began to see that the supernatural occurrences were not random, but part of an ancient pact, one that demanded acknowledgement and reparation. I realized that my presence here, in this remote cabin, was not merely an escape from the demons of my former life, but a call to face them head-on, to challenge the curse that had seeped into the very soil of the Allegheny. In a final, decisive act, I gathered Marcus, Lily, and myself one frigid night, and we performed a ritual of sorts, an amalgamation of old military cadences, local incantations, and heartfelt pleas for redemption. We circled around the cabin, our breaths mingling in the icy air, and recited words that we hoped would break the cycle of the ghostly echoes. I spoke with the raw authority of a man who had seen too much to be cowed by superstition. Yet my voice wavered as I confronted the intangible forces that had haunted me for so long. Marcus's steady gaze and Lily's quiet, resolute presence lent me strength, and for a brief, transcendent moment, it felt as though the curse might be lifted, that the echoes of orders and lost souls might finally be silenced. The following days were marked by a tentative calm. The wind, though still fierce, no longer carried the disembodied commands with the same unnerving clarity. The carved symbols on the ancient oak, though still there, seemed to shimmer less violently, as if the forest were easing its grip on the past. I continued my patrols, my recordings, and my writings with a newfound sense of purpose, a determination to reclaim not only my own soul, but to honor the memory of those who had been lost to the curse. I knew that the battle against the supernatural was not one that could be fought with sheer force of will alone, but required a delicate balance of respect, understanding, and the willingness to accept that some scars might never fully fade. In the months that followed, I found a measure of peace in the rugged isolation of the Allegheny National Forest. The curse, if it still lingered, became a part of the landscape, a reminder of the intertwined fates of man and nature, of memory and myth. I resolved to stay in that remote cabin, not as a victim of spectral forces, but as a man determined to forge a new path from the wreckage of his past. Marcus continued to support me with his practical expertise, and Lily's historical insights deepened my understanding of the land's long, sorrowful story. Together, we embraced the idea that the supernatural was not something to be feared, but an enduring part of life's tapestry, one that demanded both caution and compassion. Now, as I sit in the quiet of an early winter morning, the world outside frosted in delicate white, and the distant hoot of an owl breaking the silence, I reflect on the journey that has brought me here. I have learned that the curse of the Allegheny Echo was not a punishment imposed by some vengeful spirit, but a manifestation of the deep-seated wounds that each of us carries, wounds inflicted by the cruelty of war, by the betrayals of life, and by the relentless march of time. In facing those echoes, in daring to listen to the voices of the past, I have found a way to reconcile my own fragmented history with the living, breathing present. The forest, with its ancient pines and hidden clearings, has taught me that healing is not about erasing the past, but about accepting it and using it as a foundation for renewal. I still hear the faint, ghostly murmurs on cold nights, a reminder that some memories never truly fade, but now they no longer fill me with dread. Instead, they serve as a quiet testimony to the resilience of the human spirit, a call to honor those who came before, and to build a future where the echoes of sorrow are transformed into a melody of hope. I have come to understand that in the Allegheny, as in life, the past and the present are forever intertwined, and that by facing the darkness, we can ultimately find our way to the light. This is my account, a journey from the battlefield of my own memories to the rugged, haunting beauty of the Allegheny National Forest, where every whisper in the wind, every faded symbol carved into ancient bark, and every echo of lost orders tells a story of sacrifice, regret, and the enduring possibility of redemption. I choose to remain here, in this remote, weather-beaten cabin, not because I am unafraid, but because I have learned that the true measure of courage lies in confronting the ghosts of our past and transforming them into the seeds of a brighter tomorrow. Each day, as I step outside into the crisp mountain air, I feel both the weight of those lost voices and the strength of a man who has dared to face them. I continue my vigil with Marcus and Lily, recording every subtle change in the forest's rhythm, every shift in the balance between memory and myth, and every night, as the wind howls softly and the ancient pines murmur their eternal secrets, I find solace in the knowledge that I am not alone, that the curse, if it ever was a curse at all, has become a part of me, a reminder of the past that I have embraced in order to shape the future. This is my story, told in the quiet moments between duty and memory, in the unspoken understanding that the past is a part of us, woven into the very fabric of our being. And as I sit here, with the cold light of dawn breaking over the Allegheny, I know that I have finally found a home, a place where the echoes of history guide me, where the ghosts of lost orders have been transformed into a beacon of hope, and where I am free to write my own destiny, even as I honor the legacy of those who have come before. I never imagined that my journey toward a peaceful retirement would lead me to a place where the water itself seemed to hold memories of unspeakable sorrow. Yet, here I am, sitting on the weathered wooden dock of a small lakeside cabin on the shores of Lake Lanier in Georgia, with the gentle lapping of water against the pilings both soothing and unnerving in its cadence. My name is Rebecca Cole, and a few months ago I left behind the sterile corridors of the hospital after a long career as a nurse, yearning for a simpler, quieter life away from the relentless pace of urban existence. I thought the idea of living by a tranquil lake, where each sunrise and sunset would paint the sky in vibrant hues, would be the perfect remedy for the fatigue that had slowly seeped into my bones. I envisioned lazy afternoons spent in solitude, tending to a modest garden and reading by the gentle light of a kerosene lamp. Instead, I found myself thrust into a mystery that clung to the very water, a mystery as old and relentless as the waves crashing against the shore. I arrived at the cabin on a humid, sweltering day, when the air shimmered with heat, and the lake, calm yet deceptive, lay like a vast mirror reflecting a deep, cloudy sky. My husband, James, is a practical man, steady, cautious, and forever the voice of reason. So, when I first proposed that we trade the relentless pace of city life for this quiet retreat, he agreed with measured optimism. I, on the other hand, felt a stirring in my heart, a wild hope that this lakeside haven might finally grant me the freedom to reconnect with myself and the past. Our first few days were spent in a flurry of practicalities, unpacking our few belongings, setting up the fragile off-grid system that would power our modest dwelling, and taking tentative walks along the pebbled shore. The cabin itself was a relic of simpler times, a weathered structure with peeling white paint, and a sagging porch that looked out over the water, as if offering silent witness to countless sunsets and secrets. It wasn't long before the first oddities began to make themselves known. One sultry evening, as James and I sat on the porch drinking iced tea and watching the sun sink behind the distant trees, I noticed something peculiar in the reflection on the surface of the lake. At first, it was nothing more than a faint ripple, a distortion in the otherwise mirror-like calm. But, as the minutes ticked by, I could make out a shadowy figure moving slowly beneath the water's surface. I leaned forward, squinting against the glare, and for a brief, inexplicable moment, I thought I saw a face, a pale, sorrowful face, its eyes filled with a quiet despair. I called James over, my voice trembling, but when he peered into the water, the reflection appeared normal, a tranquil, unbroken expanse disturbed only by the gentle lapse of the current. I dismissed the vision as a trick of the light, a figment of my imagination fueled by the sweltering heat and my own restless mind. Yet, the image refused to leave me, lingering like a half-remembered dream. Over the next few days, as the oppressive humidity mingled with an almost palpable stillness over the lake, more signs of the uncanny began to surface. Early one morning, while walking along a narrow path by the water's edge, I heard a soft murmur carried on the breeze, a sound that seemed to be neither the rustle of the wind nor the murmur of water, but something in between, as if the lake itself were trying to speak. I paused, heart thumping, and strained to catch every syllable. There was no coherent word, only a series of soft, sorrowful tones that sent shivers down my spine. James, ever the pragmatist, suggested that it might be the calls of a distant bird, or perhaps the sound of the water interacting with the rocks, but I could not shake the feeling that something far older and more melancholy was at work. As I settled into this new, slow-paced life, the isolation of the cabin began to reveal its double-edged nature. During the bright, languid afternoons, I would wander the overgrown garden and explore the wooded perimeter of our property, notebook in hand, jotting down the details of every rustling leaf and shifting shadow. In these moments of solitary reflection, I felt both comforted and increasingly disquieted by the sense that I was intruding upon a story much larger than my own. I began to notice that the lake, with its placid surface and hidden depths, was not merely a scenic backdrop, but a repository of secrets. At dusk, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned a tapestry of bruised purples and fiery oranges, I would catch fleeting glimpses of something moving along the shoreline, a spectral figure that seemed to vanish when I tried to focus. There were mornings when I woke to see mist rising off the lake in delicate spirals, each wisp of fog curving in a way that suggested a deliberate design, as though the water were exhaling memories. One afternoon, while browsing the small, dusty shelves of a local antique store in a nearby town, I encountered Mrs. Jenkins, a spry, silver-haired woman with eyes that twinkled mischievously, as if privy to the secrets of the world. Over a cup of sweet tea in her cramped, memorabilia-lined parlor, she regaled me with local lore about Lake Lanier. In a hushed, reverent tone, she recounted the tale of a tragic drowning that had occurred decades ago, a story of a young woman whose life was cut short by a merciless storm, leaving behind a restless spirit said to wander the lake at night. "They say, Mrs. Jenkins confided, leaning in as though sharing a sacred secret, that her sorrow is so deep, her presence is etched into every ripple of the water. On nights like these, when the wind is just right, you can almost hear her cry out for what was lost." Her words, imbued with a mixture of melancholy and quiet wisdom, struck a chord deep within me. I left the store with Mrs. Jenkins's tale echoing in my mind, a tale that seemed to provide a key to the inexplicable phenomena I had been witnessing. Back at the cabin, the atmosphere had subtly shifted. One night, as I lay in bed with the ceaseless hum of the air conditioner struggling against the humid heat, I awoke to a soft, ghostly reflection dancing on the water's surface. The figure was fleeting, a shimmer of light that seemed to morph into the shape of a woman before dissolving into the dark depths. I sat up, heart pounding, and scrambled to the window, my eyes straining to make sense of the image. For a long moment, the water appeared ordinary, yet I could still feel the residual chill of that spectral presence, a presence that felt imbued with unspoken sorrow and a desperate longing. I scribbled frantically in my journal, desperate to capture the moment before it slipped away, even as I wondered if I was slowly succumbing to the isolation of this place. James, who had grown increasingly reticent in the face of these events, maintained a cautious skepticism. "It's just the lake, Rebecca," he would say, his tone gentle but firm, as if trying to anchor me back to a rational world. "You know how the light plays on water, especially at night." Yet I could see the anxiety in his eyes, a reflection of the same unease that gnawed at me. His pragmatic concerns clashed with the pull of something ancient and mysterious that resonated in my heart, a pull that was both terrifying and irresistibly compelling. Determined not to let fear dictate my every move, I resolved to document the unfolding mystery. Each evening, after James had retired to bed with a heavy sigh and a whispered prayer for a calm night, I would venture out onto the dock with my old digital recorder and a notebook. I recorded the sounds of the night, the low murmur of the lake, the soft crash of waves against the shore, and, on certain nights, the almost imperceptible sound of a woman's lament, as if carried by the breeze. I would write down every detail, the time the sounds began, the direction they seemed to come from, the temperature of the air, and the way the light shifted across the water. In these solitary moments, the lake transformed before my eyes into a living chronicle of past sorrows and forgotten tragedies. One particularly sultry evening, as a heavy mist rolled in over Lake Lanier, and the world seemed to dissolve into shades of gray and silver, I experienced something I can hardly put into words. I had set up my recorder on the edge of the dock, its red light blinking steadily as it captured the ambient sounds of the night. The air was thick with humidity, and the soft whisper of wind mingled with the distant calls of nocturnal birds. As I sat there, lost in the hypnotic rhythm of the lapping water, I heard it, a distinct, mournful cry that rose above the usual symphony of the lake. It was a cry filled with such profound sorrow that it brought tears to my eyes. I reached for my notebook, trembling, and wrote down the moment. The cry seemed to come from beneath the water itself, a sound that defied the natural order, as if the lake were mourning a loss too deep for human language. I could not tell if it was a trick of the acoustics or something far more real, but the emotion in that cry was undeniable, a raw, heart-wrenching lament that felt centuries old. In the days that followed, I began to experiment with simple protective measures inspired by the local lore Mrs. Jenkins had shared. James was reluctant at first, but I convinced him that a little ritual would do no harm. One early evening, as the sky blushed with the fading light of dusk, I gathered a small bowl of coarse salt and a jug of water and made my way to the dock. I carefully sprinkled salt along the edge of the water where the reflections had been most vivid, murmuring a prayer of protection that I had learned long ago. I felt a strange sense of calm as I completed the ritual, as if I were drawing a boundary between the tangible world and the dark, restless spirit that haunted the lake. James, standing a few feet away with a hesitant smile, nodded slowly, his eyes betraying both hope and apprehension. Despite the protective ritual, the mysteries of Lake Lanier deepened. There were nights when spectral figures appeared along the shoreline at dawn, their forms hazy and indistinct in the early morning light. I would catch glimpses of a woman in a long, flowing dress, her hair billowing around her like a shroud, disappearing behind clusters of trees as if fleeing from an unseen pursuer. Sometimes, as the sun began to rise, I would see faint reflections on the water that looked too human, too deliberate, to be mere optical illusions. These moments filled me with a profound mixture of dread and fascination, a sense that I was standing at the threshold of a truth too vast to be contained by simple explanation. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself increasingly drawn into the web of Lake Lanier's dark past. I began to correspond with Mrs. Jenkins, who sent me old photographs and faded newspaper clippings detailing the tragic drowning of a young woman decades ago, a story of love, loss, and an inexplicable disappearance that had haunted local memory for generations. The more I learned about her, the more I felt that her spirit had become intertwined with the very essence of the lake. Her sorrow, it seemed, had seeped into the water, becoming a part of every ripple and every whisper of wind that danced across the surface. I could almost hear her voice when the night was quiet, a soft, plaintive call that seemed to plead for recognition and peace. I began to write my own account of these events, pouring my thoughts and feelings into pages that captured the transformation of my life from the busy chaos of urban hospital corridors to the slow, haunting cadence of Lake Lanier. My writing was raw and unfiltered, a tapestry woven from both scientific observation and the ineffable pull of something otherworldly. I described the ghostly reflections, the mournful cries, and the spectral figures with a blend of clinical detail and poetic longing. Each word was a step deeper into the mystery, a testament to the belief that understanding the past could, somehow, bring healing to the present. James, whose initial skepticism had gradually given way to a quiet concern, often expressed his unease over the unfolding events. "I just worry, Rebecca," he would say during our late-night talks on the porch, the gentle hum of the crickets in the background, "that we're getting in over our heads with these things." I would reassure him with a soft smile and a squeeze of his hand, telling him that I believed that by understanding the curse of the lake, by acknowledging its dark past, we might finally bring peace not only to the spirit, but to ourselves as well. Though his eyes sometimes held worry, I sensed that deep down he trusted in my determination to uncover the truth, even as he remained anxious about what that truth might mean. One particularly stormy night, when the wind howled and rain battered the cabin like a relentless tide, I sat on the porch listening to the fury of the lake. The tempest seemed to awaken something in the water, waves that crashed with a force that echoed the anguished cries I had heard before. In that maelstrom of sound and fury, I heard it again, a cry that rose above the clamor, filled with such profound sorrow that it almost silenced the storm for a heartbeat. I clutched my recorder tightly, as if to capture the sound before it faded away, and in that moment, I felt as though I were on the verge of a breakthrough, a moment when the curse of Lake Lanier might finally reveal its secrets. In the aftermath of that night, the air around the cabin seemed charged with a new energy, a fragile hope that perhaps my efforts were making a difference. I continued my nightly rituals with renewed determination, sprinkling salt and water along the dock and murmuring prayers into the humid darkness. I began to notice that the spectral phenomena, while still present, appeared less frequently, almost as if the ancient spirit was beginning to find some measure of solace in the small acts of remembrance and respect. Yet, every time I caught a glimpse of a ghostly figure in the morning mist, or heard a faint, mournful whisper on the wind, I was reminded that the lake's dark past was not so easily exorcised. Over the course of the following months, I found that my journey had transformed me in ways I could scarcely have predicted. The mysteries of Lake Lanier, with their blend of tragedy, beauty, and supernatural wonder, had seeped into my very soul, altering my perceptions of life, loss, and healing. I learned that the ghostly apparitions and the sorrowful echoes were not to be feared or banished, but rather to be understood, as poignant reminders of a past that had shaped this place and, in many ways, shaped me. My writing became a daily meditation on the interplay between the tangible and the spectral, a record of the fragile boundary between memory and myth. There were moments when, in the quiet solitude of the early morning, I would sit on the dock as the first light of dawn broke over the lake and feel an overwhelming connection to the water, a deep, almost primordial bond that reminded me that every life, every tragedy, leaves its mark on the world. I would watch as the sun's rays danced upon the ripples, illuminating the surface with a golden glow, and I felt, in that fleeting brilliance, a promise that even the darkest curses could eventually yield to the light. James, who had come to see the beauty in these mysteries, even as he remained cautious, began to join me on these quiet vigils, his presence a steady reassurance that we were in this together. I eventually compiled my experiences, my observations, and my reflections into a manuscript, a chronicle of our time by the cursed waters of Lake Lanier. In writing, I discovered a profound sense of catharsis, a way to honor the memory of a tragic past and to find meaning in the spectral echoes that continued to haunt the shoreline. The manuscript was not merely an account of ghostly apparitions or inexplicable sounds. It was a meditation on the nature of memory, the enduring power of loss, and the possibility of redemption through understanding. Each page was imbued with both the raw intensity of my emotions and the measured observations of a woman determined to make sense of a world where the supernatural coexisted with the everyday. Now, as I sit in the soft glow of a lamp inside our little cabin, the steady, rhythmic pulse of the lake outside, a constant reminder of nature's timeless beauty, I feel both the weight of the past and a fragile hope for the future. I have come to understand that the curse that lingers over Lake Lanier is not a force to be fought with fear, but a sorrow to be acknowledged, understood, and ultimately healed. I choose to remain here, not because I am unafraid, but because I believe that in facing the darkness head-on, in listening to the voices of those who have long been silenced by tragedy, I can help bring a measure of peace to this place, and, in turn, to my own heart. This is my account. A journey that began with the desire to escape the noise and chaos of my former life, and led me to a quiet lakeside cabin steeped in mystery, where every ripple on the water, every whispered cry carried on the humid air, tells a story of love, loss, and the enduring search for redemption. I continue to record my experiences each night, my writings a testament to the belief that understanding the dark history of Lake Lanier might one day transform its curse into a legacy of healing and remembrance. And every day, as I step outside into the warm, murky light of a Georgian sunrise, I carry with me the hope that the spirit of the past, though sorrowful and restless, can be gently soothed by the simple acts of remembrance and compassion, a hope that one day the cursed waters might finally sing a song of peace. I remember the moment I first stepped off the rutted county road and into the shadow of the Cumberland Plateau, not with the fanfare of a grand arrival, but with the quiet resignation of a soul already weary from loss. It was early autumn, the sky a patchwork of slate and promise, and I, the recently widowed Maggie Evans, found myself clutching a battered leather suitcase and a portfolio of unfinished paintings. I had come here to a secluded farmhouse that had once belonged to my grandmother, a relic whispered about in our family for its inexplicable past and rumored hauntings. The house, with its sagging roof and walls blackened by decades of smoke and sorrow, sat on the rugged edge of the plateau like a stubborn secret, half swallowed by gnarled trees and the slow, persistent creep of ivy. I had left behind the bustling art scene of the city and the relentless ache of grief for my late husband in search of something simpler, a place where I could perhaps patch together the shattered pieces of my heart and capture the raw beauty of nature on canvas. I arrived with a hope that the stark, timeless landscape would speak to me, that the quiet solitude might ease the unbearable weight of my loss. My only companions in this new chapter were Harold, an old friend and retired park ranger whose gruff exterior belied a deep well of wisdom about the land, and my nephew Tim, a bright-eyed college student whose fascination with local folklore was as boundless as the mist that rolled over the hills each dawn. The farmhouse itself was a study in contradictions. Its exterior was weathered and forlorn, the wooden siding peeling in places like ancient parchment. Yet the view from its sagging porch was breathtaking, a sweeping vista of dense woodland, rolling hills, and the endless horizon of the plateau that shifted in tone from dusk's purples to the soft blush of early morning. Inside, the house was sparsely furnished, with creaking floorboards that seemed to murmur stories of a bygone era. In the attic, I discovered a trove of old photographs and handwritten letters, their images faded but poignant, ghostly figures captured in sepia tones, smiling faces that seemed out of place in the present, and cryptic symbols scribbled in the margins of forgotten journals. I felt as if the house itself was alive with memory, and I could almost hear the echoes of voices long silenced. The first few days were spent in a blur of practical work, mending broken windows, patching the leaky roof, and hauling firewood through the overgrown yard, mixed with moments of quiet introspection as I set up my easel by a window and began to paint the melancholy beauty of the landscape. Harold would sit nearby, regaling me with stories of the plateau, tales of sudden mists that concealed entire valleys, of wild animals that roamed unseen in the twilight, and of strange lights flickering among the trees on moonless nights. Tim, eager and inquisitive, spent his afternoons poring over old records at the local library and interviewing some of the older residents in the nearby town. He was determined to unearth any trace of our family's connection to the farmhouse, a connection that, according to family lore, ran deeper than blood, entwining our lineage with the very soul of the land. It wasn't long before I began to notice subtle, unsettling details that defied a simple explanation. One cold morning, as I walked along the narrow path behind the farmhouse, my boots crunching on a delicate carpet of frost, I found a series of small, circular markings pressed into the soft earth. They were arranged in a pattern that suggested deliberate design, and I recalled with a start that they resembled the faint imprint of a hand, perhaps that of a small child. The discovery sent a shiver down my spine. I knelt and brushed away a few flakes of ice, trying to discern any other details, but the pattern dissolved quickly under the warmth of my touch. I made a mental note to ask Harold about it later. He was known to be privy to the older, whispered tales of the plateau that were not written in any book. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the dense line of hills and the sky turned a deep, inky blue, I sat by the aging wood stove in the main room of the farmhouse. The flames danced feebly, casting trembling shadows on the bare walls, and the silence was broken only by the occasional creak of the old building settling into the chill of night. It was then that I first heard it clearly, a soft, almost musical murmur that seemed to float from somewhere deep within the house. I couldn't make out the words, only the melancholic tone of a lullaby half remembered, as if sung by a voice from another time. My heart pounded in my ears as I strained to listen, feeling both drawn and repelled by the sound. Was it merely the wind playing tricks on the old timbers, or something far more tangible, a ghostly echo of a sorrow long past? The next morning, Harold found me poring over a stack of yellowed letters in the attic. He looked at me with a knowing gaze that seemed to carry the weight of years and whispered secrets. "That house has a long memory, Maggie," he said in his gravelly voice. "Your grandmother used to say that it held more than just our family's history. It held the voices of those who once lived here, of dreams and tragedies that were never forgotten." His words made me shudder, but also filled me with a curious determination to understand what lay beneath the surface of this forlorn place. I began to record my observations in a leather-bound journal, scribbling down every strange occurrence: the footprints in the frost, the murmurings in the dark, the fleeting glimpse of a face in a dusty photograph that seemed to change each time I looked at it. Tim returned from town one afternoon with a stack of old newspaper clippings and a battered recorder, his eyes alight with the thrill of discovery. He told me of a local legend, one that spoke of a vengeful spirit that haunted the edges of the plateau, a spirit said to be the restless soul of a young woman who had died under mysterious circumstances many decades ago. According to the accounts he'd gathered, her name was Eliza, and she had been a victim of a tragic accident, or perhaps even foul play, in a time when the old ways still held sway over life in these remote parts. The story was fragmentary and steeped in rumor, but it resonated with a disquiet I could not shake. I wondered if the murmurs I had heard at night were her sorrowful calls, if the footprints in the frost were her gentle, desperate attempts to leave a mark upon the world once more. That very night, after a bitter wind had swept across the plateau and rattled the windows of the farmhouse like a chorus of unseen voices, I decided to venture out on my own. Clad in a heavy woolen coat and clutching my journal and a small flashlight, I made my way through the darkened yard toward the spot where I had seen the mysterious markings. The cold was piercing, and each step felt like an intrusion into a realm where time and memory intermingled. I reached the clearing and stood motionless, the silence of the night broken only by the sound of my own labored breathing and the distant cry of a night bird. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, as if carried on the wind, I heard it, a clear, almost plaintive sigh that seemed to emanate from the very earth. It was followed by a whisper, so soft that I could barely make out its meaning, a single word, perhaps a name, that sent a shiver cascading down my spine. I could not tell if it was Eliza calling out from the void of memory, or some other voice from the past, but the sound filled me with an indescribable mixture of sorrow and hope. Over the next several weeks, the presence in the farmhouse grew more insistent. I began to see shapes in the corner of my eyes, brief, fleeting images of a woman in a faded dress, her features shrouded in mist, appearing in the reflective surfaces of old mirrors or the darkened glass of a window. At times, I would awaken to find that items had been moved ever so slightly, as if by unseen hands. Harold, ever the practical one, reassured me that old houses often shifted with the changing weather. Yet I could not shake the feeling that something else was at work. Tim, for his part, became even more engrossed in the historical records, uncovering references to Eliza's tragic life and hints that our family might have once been intertwined with her fate in ways long forgotten. One particularly stormy night, when the wind howled like a chorus of lost souls and the rain drummed relentlessly against the roof, I sat alone in my room, the flickering light of a kerosene lamp casting long, wavering shadows on the walls. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional creak of the old house. Then, amid the storm's fury, I heard a distinct sound, a soft, rhythmic tapping at the door. I froze, my heart pounding in the quiet space. Slowly, I rose and approached the door, the lamp trembling in my grasp. When I opened it, nothing was there, only the swirling darkness of the storm and the echo of that mysterious tapping fading into the night. I closed the door with a trembling hand, wondering if the very essence of the past was trying to break through the barrier between memory and the present. The following morning, as the storm subsided, and the first tentative light of dawn painted the sky in hues of soft lavender and pale gold, I found Harold waiting on the porch with a furrowed brow and a silent question in his eyes. Over steaming cups of strong black coffee, he confided that he had once experienced similar phenomena in his early days as a park ranger, back when he believed in the old legends with a fervor that time had since tempered. "These lands remember, Maggie," he said, his voice quiet and measured. "They hold on to every sorrow, every joy, every tragedy. Sometimes those memories seep out, and you'll hear their echoes. I once heard the name Eliza, whispered on a winter wind so clear I thought it was a command. It's as if the past is still very much alive here." His words both comforted and unsettled me, for I had come seeking solace and a fresh start, not a constant reminder of loss and lingering ghosts. In the weeks that followed, I found myself immersed in a delicate dance with the unknown. I began to integrate rituals into my daily routine, small acts of remembrance that felt both protective and reverent. Each evening, as twilight surrendered to the deep indigo of night, I would light a few candles and arrange them in a circle on the worn wooden table in the living room, a symbolic gesture to honor the memories that resided within these walls. I would recite softly from an old prayer book that my grandmother had given me, words that spoke of remembrance and forgiveness, of releasing the past while keeping its lessons close to the heart. Sometimes Harold joined me in these quiet ceremonies, his deep, rumbling voice lending strength to the fragile hope that perhaps we could coax the restless spirits into peaceful slumber. Tim, ever the diligent researcher, continued to uncover more pieces of our family's connection to the haunting legacy of the farmhouse. Late one night, after returning from a lengthy visit to the county archives, he burst into the living room with a stack of yellowed documents and a look of excited apprehension. "Aunt Maggie," he said breathlessly, "look at this. There's a reference here to an Eliza Evans, a relative, by the sound of it, and a series of events that match up with what we've been experiencing. It seems our family may have been entangled in this curse long before you arrived." His revelation sent a chill through me, not out of fear, but a profound sorrow for the tragic history that might have bound our lives to this place. I spent the next several days poring over the documents, trying to piece together the narrative of Eliza Evans, a young woman whose life had been cut short in a manner so shrouded in mystery that every detail felt like a shard of broken glass, sharp and unyielding. As winter slowly began to yield to the first hints of spring, the relentless intensity of the haunting gradually softened into a persistent, bittersweet presence. The ghostly apparitions became less abrupt, more like gentle reminders that drifted through the early morning mist. I found that, instead of causing terror, they began to stir something in me, a deep, empathetic longing to understand the sorrows that had once defined a life and to reconcile them with the hope that the future might yet hold redemption. My art, which had long been a means of processing my grief, began to transform. I painted with a new intensity, my canvases awash with the muted colors of winter landscapes and the subtle interplay of light and shadow that seemed to capture the essence of the haunted plateau. Each brush stroke was a dialogue between the past and the present, a silent conversation with the ghostly echoes that filled the farmhouse and the surrounding woods. One cool, clear morning, as I sat on the back porch with Harold and Tim, watching the soft light of dawn reveal the mist-shrouded peaks of the plateau, I felt a deep sense of calm. The air was crisp, and the world seemed to breathe with the quiet persistence of nature. I could see, in the gentle sway of the trees and the glistening dew on the grass, the enduring presence of those who had come before, a tapestry of lives interwoven with loss, memory, and hope. I realized that the ghosts of this place were not simply specters of despair, but also silent witnesses to the resilience of the human spirit. They were part of a legacy that could teach us to honor our pain, to embrace our history, and, ultimately, to find a way to move forward. I have come to understand that living on this rugged edge of the Cumberland Plateau means accepting that some mysteries may never be fully explained. The spectral lights that flicker among the trees at dusk, the soft voices that echo in the quiet hours before dawn, and the delicate imprints left on frost-laden windows are not intrusions to be banished by force, but subtle invitations to remember, to honor the stories of the past, and to allow them to guide us toward healing. I have learned to see these manifestations as a living part of the land, as integral to the identity of this place as the ancient pines and the rolling, misty hills. They remind me that every loss, every tear, leaves an indelible mark on the tapestry of our lives, and that by acknowledging our sorrows, we create space for renewal. Now, as I sit at my easel in the quiet solitude of a late spring afternoon, the farmhouse bathed in the soft glow of the sun, and the sound of a gentle breeze rustling through newly green leaves, I feel an enduring sense of purpose. I continue to paint, to write, and to document the subtle interplay of memory and myth that defines my life on the plateau. Harold's steadfast presence, Tim's relentless quest for truth, and my own journey through grief and redemption have intertwined to create a narrative that is as complex and beautiful as the landscape around me. I have chosen to remain in this secluded farmhouse not because I am unafraid of the ghosts that linger in the shadows, but because I have discovered that embracing them, acknowledging the echoes of loss and the tender beauty of remembrance, has allowed me to heal in ways I never imagined possible. The curse that once seemed to bind our family to a tragic fate now feels like a bittersweet legacy, a reminder that even in the midst of pain, there can be transformation and hope. Each day, I step outside into the crisp mountain air with a renewed sense of wonder and determination, knowing that the ghosts of the past are not merely specters to be feared, but voices that call me to honor what once was and to forge a brighter path forward. This is my account, a journey from the depths of personal grief to a quiet, resolute acceptance of the mysteries that permeate the Cumberland Plateau. It is a story of loss and healing, of spectral whispers, and the unyielding strength of memory. In the silent corridors of an old farmhouse and the wind-swept expanses of rugged hills, I have found a way to weave together the fragments of my past into a tapestry of hope, a living testament to the enduring power of art, remembrance, and the human spirit. And so, as I continue to paint the ephemeral beauty of this land, and record its secrets in my journal. I carry with me the legacy of those who have come before, a legacy that, in its own mysterious way, lights the path toward a future where the echoes of sorrow are transformed into the gentle music of renewal. It began on an unremarkable November morning when I boarded a rattling train bound for the rural heart of upstate New York. I wasn't sure why I had chosen the Finger Lakes region for my retreat. Perhaps it was the promise of solitude, the lure of misty mornings over still water, or the need to escape the relentless clamor of my urban past. My name is Benjamin Carter, and I've spent the better part of my life as a writer, retreating into seclusion to chase elusive truths and to transform personal chaos into words. I arrived at a small, weathered station near the edge of one of the lakes with nothing more than a battered notebook, a well-worn camera, and an aching desire to find solace among ancient waters and quiet forests. The train's clatter faded into a distant murmur as I stepped onto the platform and into the crisp autumn air, the landscape unfolding before me in a tapestry of russet and gold. I had rented an old farmhouse that sat precariously on the shoreline of one of the Finger Lakes, a solitary structure of peeling white paint and sagging eaves, its windows reflecting the muted light of a cloudy day. The house was both charming and forlorn, exuding the quiet dignity of a place that had seen decades of seasons pass by. I remember the first time I walked up the creaking wooden steps, my boots crunching on frost-hardened gravel, feeling as though I had stepped into a forgotten world where every gust of wind carried echoes of stories long past. I settled in slowly. My partner, Laura, a sensitive photographer with a remarkable knack for capturing the eerie beauty of the mundane, had joined me in this venture. We had chosen the farmhouse not only for its rustic allure, but also because we believed it might provide the perfect backdrop for our respective crafts. Mine, the solitary pursuit of writing, and hers, the delicate art of visual storytelling. Laura's eyes lit up each morning as she unfurled her camera and stepped outside, determined to catch the first glimmers of dawn reflecting on the lake's surface, while I filled pages with observations about the interplay of light, shadow, and water. For a while, the peaceful isolation was exactly what I had craved. A slow, measured rhythm that allowed me to rediscover a part of myself that had been buried under years of city life. But as the days passed, subtle disturbances began to intrude on our carefully constructed peace. I first noticed it on a mist-laden morning when I was taking a solitary walk along the shoreline. The water, usually a placid mirror in the early light, rippled in an odd, almost hypnotic pattern. I paused, staring into the shifting reflections, and in one fleeting moment I thought I saw a figure, a pale, indistinct silhouette, gliding just beneath the surface. The sight made my heart race, but I rationalized it as a trick of the light or a shadow cast by the low-hanging clouds. Still, the image lingered in my mind long after I had resumed my walk, an echo that would return on subsequent mornings. That same week, while reviewing some of the photographs Laura had taken, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. In one shot of the lake at dusk, there was a blurred reflection along the edge of the water, a vague, ghostly figure that looked almost like a person in a long, flowing dress, standing just at the boundary between land and water. I mentioned it to Laura over a late dinner of simple fare, but she, ever the pragmatist, suggested that it might have been a trick of the shutter, or an accidental double exposure. Yet, as I scrutinized the image, the figure's outline seemed too deliberate, too present to be dismissed entirely as photographic error. As nights grew longer and the air turned cooler, the farmhouse began to reveal more of its uncanny nature. One evening, after a particularly long day of walking the wooded trails and exploring the forgotten corners of the property, I sat alone on the creaking porch. The sky was an indigo canvas sprinkled with stars, and the lake lay dark and enigmatic before me. In the quiet, all I could hear was the soft, rhythmic lapping of water and the occasional call of a distant owl. Then, as if from the very depths of the lake, a sound emerged, a soft, mournful hum that seemed to float on the wind. It was not a sound I could place, a lullaby perhaps, or a whispered prayer, but it was filled with a deep sorrow that made my eyes mist over. I listened, transfixed, as the sound ebbed and flowed like the tide, a melancholy melody that hinted at stories of loss and longing. For a long while, I sat there, lost in the spell of that mournful tune, wondering if it were a fragment of a past life or perhaps the voice of the lake itself calling out to me. In the days that followed, I began to document these occurrences in my journal. I recorded the precise times the spectral hum would rise, the angles at which the morning light revealed mysterious shapes on the water, and the moments when Laura's photographs captured strange, transient images that defied explanation. My writing took on a confessional tone, as if I were pouring out not just observations, but pieces of my own fractured soul. I wrote about the ghostly figures that seemed to shimmer in the twilight, about the sensation of being watched by unseen eyes, and about the recurring vision of a face, a sorrowful, fleeting visage that appeared in the ripples of the lake at dawn. The more I wrote, the more it felt as if the lake was speaking to me, sharing with me its own secrets in a language that was part light, part memory, and wholly ineffable. I began to wonder if the haunting phenomena were connected to a local legend I had heard whispered by the older residents of a nearby town. One such legend spoke of a young woman named Evelyn, who, according to lore, had drowned in the very waters of the Finger Lakes under tragic circumstances. They said her spirit lingered, bound to the lake by a sorrow too deep to release. I wasn't sure if this tale was simply a myth concocted by a community steeped in history and loss, or if it was the root of the spectral images I was beginning to see. The possibility filled me with both dread and an odd sense of kinship, as if, in some inexplicable way, I too were marked by loss, destined to be intertwined with the haunting beauty of this place. Laura, for her part, became increasingly fascinated by the phenomena. While I scribbled fervently in my journal, she spent hours in the early morning light capturing images that sometimes revealed faint, translucent figures along the shoreline. One particularly evocative photograph showed a slender figure in a white dress, its features blurred into obscurity, standing knee-deep in the water as if gazing out over the lake in silent lament. She told me later, over cups of steaming coffee in our cramped kitchen, that the image had moved her to tears. "There's a loneliness in it," she said softly, her eyes reflecting the depths of her own emotions. "It's as if the lake holds the memories of every sorrowful goodbye, every unfulfilled promise." Her words resonated deeply with me, affirming my belief that the hauntings were not malevolent intrusions, but rather echoes of a collective grief that had been absorbed by the water over time. Despite the mounting evidence of the supernatural, life on the farmhouse continued with its inevitable blend of beauty and hardship. The off-grid system we relied upon was temperamental, and during a particularly sweltering summer, we experienced extended power outages that plunged us into near total darkness for days on end. During those times, we found comfort in the simplicity of our existence, cooking over an open fire, reading by the light of oil lamps, and sharing long conversations on the porch as the stars wheeled overhead. Yet, even in those moments of rustic contentment, the mystery of the lake loomed large. I could sense it in the way the water shimmered under the moonlight, in the hushed whispers of the wind as it passed through the trees, and in the lingering sadness that seemed to seep into every crevice of the old farmhouse. One night, after an especially long day of recording sounds and chasing down fleeting images, I found myself alone on the dock. The lake was unnervingly still, the surface like a sheet of glass that reflected the star-studded sky. I sat with my recorder clutched tightly, my breath visible in the cool night air, and waited. Then, as if in answer to some unspoken plea, I heard it again, the unmistakable, heart-wrenching cry of a woman rising from beneath the water. It was a sound that cut through the silence like a knife, filled with such profound sorrow that I felt a tear slide down my cheek. I pressed record, my hands trembling as I listened to the cry, a long, lingering lament that seemed to carry the weight of a lifetime of unspoken grief. In that moment, I realized that the lake was more than just a body of water. It was a living repository of memory, a keeper of the stories of those who had suffered and been lost. In the weeks that followed, I grew increasingly determined to unravel the mystery of the spectral cry and the elusive figures that haunted the water's edge. I delved into local archives, combed through faded newspaper clippings, and even contacted a few historians who specialized in the folklore of the Finger Lakes region. One recurring theme emerged: the tragic story of Evelyn Moore, a young woman who had drowned under mysterious circumstances decades ago, her death shrouded in ambiguity and steeped in sorrow. According to one faded article I found in a small-town library, Evelyn had been a promising singer whose voice was said to have the power to move hearts, and her untimely demise had left a scar on the community that had never quite healed. The more I learned about her, the more I began to suspect that the spectral images and mournful cries I was capturing might be echoes of her lost soul, a fragment of a story that refused to fade away with time. My manuscript, which I had begun as a simple journal of my experiences, slowly transformed into a sprawling narrative, a tapestry of observation, research, and raw emotion. Each page was a dialogue between the tangible present and the intangible past, a meditation on loss and the way memories, like water, find their way into every crevice of existence. I wrote about the shimmering reflections on the lake that hinted at faces not my own, about the cold draughts that carried faint, sorrowful whispers, and about the persistent feeling that I was standing at the crossroads of life and something far older and more enduring. My writing became a lifeline, a means of confronting the grief that had driven me to this secluded retreat, and a way to honor the silent voice of the lake that seemed to sing its laments each night. Laura's photography continued to capture moments that defied explanation. In one series of images, taken at dawn, she managed to capture what appeared to be the outline of a figure, ethereal, nearly translucent, standing at the very edge of the water, its eyes lost in a gaze that seemed to span the gulf between worlds. In those photographs, I sensed not a malevolent force, but a profound sadness, a longing to be remembered, to be recognized as a part of something greater than the fleeting moments of our lives. Laura later told me that the image filled her with a strange, bittersweet comfort, as if the figure was a gentle reminder that even in death there could be beauty and a quiet dignity. One particularly stormy night remains etched in my memory. The wind was fierce, and the rain fell in sheets so thick that the world outside the farmhouse seemed to dissolve into a blurred watercolor. I sat in the living room with James on the phone. He was checking in from our home in the city, his voice laced with concern as he tried to reassure me that I was not alone in my experiences. The power flickered and then went out, plunging us into darkness save for the intermittent glow of a kerosene lamp. In that oppressive silence, as the storm raged outside, I heard the cry once more, the anguished wail rising from the depths of the lake, so potent that it silenced even the clamor of the tempest for a brief, heart-stopping moment. I stood there, frozen by the raw emotion of it, feeling every bit of the sorrow as if it were my own. I recorded the sound with trembling hands, aware that each note was a piece of a puzzle that spanned decades and lives, a fragment of a tragedy that refused to be forgotten. In the days after that storm, a tentative calm settled over the farmhouse. The spectral occurrences became less frequent, or perhaps they were more subtle. A shadow at the corner of my eye, a soft murmur caught on the wind. I began to integrate protective rituals into my daily routine, inspired by both the local lore I had uncovered and the quiet wisdom of the elders I had met. I would often light a small candle on the windowsill at dusk, its gentle flame a beacon against the encroaching darkness, and recite simple prayers of remembrance and release, hoping to soothe the restless spirit of the lake. Laura and I sometimes ventured out together during the early hours, capturing the delicate interplay of light and water in moments of serene beauty, even as the underlying mystery remained unsolved. Timelessly, as the seasons began to shift, and the bitter chill of winter gave way to the tentative warmth of spring, I found that the haunting presence of the lake had become an integral part of my new life. The spectral echoes, the ghostly images, and the mournful cries were not vanquished by my rituals, but transformed into a persistent reminder that every soul, every life, leaves its mark. I began to see them not as curses or malevolent forces, but as the lingering traces of stories that demanded to be acknowledged. The legend of Evelyn Moore, once a tragic footnote in a faded newspaper clipping, had grown into something real, a living memory that danced on the surface of the water and whispered through the leaves of the surrounding woods. In time, I compiled my experiences, observations, and research into a manuscript that was as much a memoir as it was an exploration of the supernatural. Each chapter was a journey, a step into the depths of memory, a confrontation with the unspoken, and a tribute to the enduring power of loss and redemption. My writing took on a lyrical quality, weaving together the tangible details of daily life with the ineffable beauty of spectral mystery. I wrote of the way the lake could be both a mirror and a window, reflecting the sorrows of the past while offering a glimpse of a hope that might one day transcend them. Now, as I sit at my desk in the quiet sanctum of our lakeside farmhouse, the gentle hum of the water a constant companion, I reflect on the path that led me here, a journey from the frenetic pace of a city life filled with broken promises and endless noise, to a place where every ripple on the water, every whisper of wind, carries the legacy of a soul lost and the promise of healing. I have come to accept that the haunting of Lake Lanier is not a malevolent curse to be feared, but a profound, living reminder that every life, no matter how tragic, continues to echo in the tapestry of time. James's distant calls from the city, though still filled with concern, now seem like echoes of another life, a life I once knew but have since left behind. Laura's images, which capture both beauty and melancholy, serve as constant proof that even the most elusive mysteries can be woven into the fabric of everyday reality. I have learned to listen to the water, to let its quiet lament guide me in my writing, and to honor the memory of those who have faded into its depths. Each day, I rise with a sense of quiet determination, stepping onto the dock to greet the dawn as the sun's first light dances on the ripples. I feel that in embracing the sorrow that lingers along the shores of this cursed yet beautiful lake, I have found a way to transform my grief into something meaningful, a legacy of remembrance, a promise that even in the depths of loss, there is hope. The spectral cry I recorded that stormy night, the ghostly reflection of a sorrowful face, and the gentle murmur of a forgotten name have become threads in the tapestry of my new life, threads that connect me to a past I can no longer ignore, and to a future that, though uncertain, holds the possibility of healing. This is my account, a chronicle of a journey into the heart of mystery along the shores of Lake Lanier, where every ripple and every whisper speaks of love, loss, and the inexorable pull of memory. I remain here, not because I have all the answers, but because I have learned that sometimes the truth is found in the spaces between the known and the unknown, in the quiet moments when the soul listens to the eternal song of the water. And so, with every passing day, as I write these words and capture fleeting images on my camera, I honor the spirit of the lake, a spirit that, despite its sorrowful lament, carries within it the promise that even the darkest curses can be transformed into a legacy of hope and healing. I remember the afternoon I first drove into the vast, tangled wilderness of the Pine Barrens, a landscape so unlike the gleaming glass towers and fluorescent corridors of my old corporate world that I almost couldn't believe I was really here. I'd left behind the relentless pressure of being a tech entrepreneur, the endless cycle of board meetings and codes, seeking refuge in a place whispered about in legend, as much as it was known for its harsh beauty. My name is Carla Rivera, and I was determined to reinvent my life, to trade sterile cubicles for the raw, earthy pulse of New Jersey's Pine Barrens, where the very air seemed alive with secrets and the promise of something otherworldly. I arrived with nothing but a battered pickup truck loaded with a few personal belongings, a toolbox of survival gear, and a fierce resolve to embrace a simpler, off-grid existence. The Pine Barrens welcomed me with a strange kind of quiet. The road that led to my new homestead was a narrow, twisting path flanked by dense, dark forests and marshy fields that stretched out like a forgotten realm. I drove slowly, every twist of the road revealing another layer of rugged wilderness, ancient pines standing like silent sentinels, the ground soft with decaying leaves, and the pervasive scent of damp earth mingled with a faint, sweet odor of wild berries. There was an almost palpable sense of mystery in the air, as if the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to discover its hidden truths. I soon settled into a small, time-worn cabin that had once belonged to a family long vanished into local folklore. The structure was modest, weathered wooden siding, a sagging porch that creaked underfoot, and windows that looked out over a marshy expanse. It was far from luxurious, but it possessed an undeniable charm and a connection to the land that no high-rise office ever could. I quickly learned that living off-grid in the Pine Barrens was both a blessing and a challenge. The isolation meant that every day was a test of self-reliance, patching leaky roofs, hauling water from a nearby well, and contending with the unpredictable moods of nature. Yet, every evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky with bruised purples and fiery oranges, I felt a sense of peace that I had never known in the corporate world. I wasn't alone in this new chapter. My longtime friend Mike, a rugged outdoorsman with a hearty laugh and a skeptical eye, had joined me in this venture. Mike was the kind of person who believed that no amount of superstition could stand against common sense, yet even he seemed visibly unsettled by the eerie aura that clung to the pines. He'd arrived with a backpack filled with camping gear, a trusty old hunting rifle, and a ready willingness to help me build a life away from the distractions of modernity. Despite his gruff exterior, I could see that his eyes often flickered with something like awe when he looked out over the sprawling, shadowy forest. Our first few days together were a blend of practical labor and cautious exploration. We spent mornings chopping wood and repairing the cabin's aging structure, our breaths visible in the chilly air as we labored under a low, slanting sun. Afternoons were reserved for long hikes through the dense underbrush, where Mike would point out the tracks of deer or the nests of elusive birds, and I would scribble notes in a battered journal, recording every detail as if trying to capture the heartbeat of the wilderness. There was an undeniable rhythm to life here, one that pulsed slowly and steadily, unburdened by the relentless pace of technology and deadlines. Yet it wasn't long before I began to notice oddities that defied simple explanation. One humid evening, as dusk settled over the forest and the sky turned a deep, mysterious indigo, I stepped out onto the porch to light a lantern. The usual chorus of crickets and rustling leaves was there, but beneath it I heard a soft, almost musical sound, a low, rhythmic humming that seemed to emanate from somewhere deep within the woods. I paused, listening intently, and for a fleeting moment I felt as if the very air around me vibrated with sorrow. It was a sound that felt ancient, laden with emotion, like the whisper of a long-forgotten lullaby sung by a voice no longer living. I couldn't tell if it was the wind weaving through the trees or something more, a spectral call from beyond the veil of the everyday. The following morning, while Mike and I were clearing fallen branches near the edge of the property, I discovered something that sent an unexpected chill down my spine. Embedded in the soft, spongy earth were a series of small, intricate symbols carved into the ground, a pattern that resembled a series of arcane runes. They were fresh, I suspected, as the earth around them was disturbed and still warm despite the cool morning air. I knelt down to inspect them, tracing the curving lines with a gloved finger, and, for a moment, I thought I recognized part of the design from an old book on local legends I had skimmed during my first week here. Mike peered over my shoulder, squinting as if trying to read a secret message. "Carla, you sure these weren't left by someone messing around?" he asked with a chuckle that didn't quite reach his eyes, but I wasn't convinced. The precision of the carvings, the deliberate curves and intersections, suggested they were not the work of mere vandalism, but something ritualistic, a sign left by an unseen hand. That night, as a brisk wind swept across the cabin and the full moon rose in a cloudless sky, I found myself unable to sleep. I lay in bed, my eyes fixed on the ceiling, the eerie sound of that mysterious humming lingering in my mind. I felt an inexplicable urge to walk outside, to confront the source of the sound head-on. With a heavy heart and a mind full of questions, I stepped into the cool night, Mike's distant reassurance echoing in my memory. The forest loomed around me, its dark outlines shifting with the interplay of moonlight and shadow. I wandered for what felt like hours, following a trail that seemed to call to me, a faint, pulsing light in the distance that flickered like a heartbeat among the trees. I don't know how far I went, or if I even intended to find anything at all. I was simply listening, letting the sounds and sensations guide me into the depths of the pine barrens. At one point, I found myself standing before a clearing where the air was unnaturally still. The only sound was the gentle whisper of the wind, and in that silence, I thought I saw movement. A delicate figure, half glimpsed in the corner of my eye, standing silently beneath a gnarled oak. The figure was too transient to make out clearly, yet its presence was undeniable, a fleeting shape that vanished as quickly as it appeared. I stood frozen, heart hammering, trying to force my eyes to capture the memory, but it was as if the forest had swallowed it whole. I returned to the cabin with a mind swirling with uncertainty, a mix of fear, wonder, and the gnawing realization that the pine barrens were far more alive than I had ever imagined. The following day, over a meager breakfast of stale bread and strong coffee brewed over a portable stove, I shared my experience with Mike. He listened in silence, his expression unreadable, then said, "Carla, you're letting the stories get to you. There's a lot of superstition in these parts, and the land tends to play tricks on a tired mind." His words were meant to comfort, but I could sense a hint of doubt in his tone, a small crack in the armor of his skepticism that made me wonder if he, too, was beginning to feel the weight of the unexplainable. I nodded and smiled, but inside I resolved to document everything, to let the truth reveal itself in the details, however subtle. Over the next few weeks, I became both an observer and a reluctant participant in the mysteries of the Pine Barrens. I filled pages of my journal with descriptions of the ethereal sounds I heard at night, the strange symbols etched into the earth, and the occasional fleeting glimmer of a figure moving just at the edge of my vision. My days were spent mending the cabin, gathering supplies, and venturing into the dense forest to capture its many moods on my aging digital recorder, and in sketches that I later tried to translate into oil paintings. There was a rhythm to my life now, a slow, deliberate pace that allowed me to notice every whisper of wind, every shift in the play of moonlight on the treetops. One crisp evening, as the chill of November crept into the air and the stars shone with a sharp clarity that made the world seem both infinite and intimate, I decided to venture deeper into the forest than I ever had before. I took a flashlight, my journal, and a small camera, determined to follow a faint trail of unusual sounds I had recorded the night before. The path was narrow and overgrown, and, as I made my way among the towering pines, the darkness around me was pierced only by the steady beam of my light. I felt both exhilarated and apprehensive, a familiar tension that reminded me of the thrill of uncovering a secret and the dread of what I might find. After what felt like an eternity of wandering, I emerged into a small clearing where the air was thick with mist, and the ground was soft with decaying leaves. Here, the silence was profound, broken only by the steady drip of moisture from the leaves overhead. I sat down on a fallen log and opened my journal, hoping to capture the essence of the moment with words, as if by writing I could somehow unravel the mysteries that lay hidden in the shadows. It was then that I heard a sound so gentle and melancholic that I froze, a soft, plaintive murmur that seemed to echo from the depths of the forest itself, carrying with it the unmistakable cadence of a sorrowful lullaby. I listened, my heart aching as the sound ebbed and flowed with the wind. In that fragile moment, I felt as if the forest were reaching out to me, sharing with me a secret older than time, a memory of love and loss that had been preserved in every whisper and rustle. In the days that followed, I sought answers wherever I could. I visited the local diner in a small town on the edge of the Barrens, where the patrons spoke in low voices of the Jersey Devil and other legends that had grown up around these parts. I met Mr. O'Connor, a retired park ranger with a shock of silver hair and a warm, weathered smile, who told me stories of eerie sightings and inexplicable occurrences that defied logical explanation. "The pines," he said, his eyes twinkling with a mix of mirth and melancholy, "have a way of keeping their secrets. Sometimes the devil isn't so much a creature as it is a force, a reminder that not everything in life can be tamed or understood." His words resonated with me, stirring a sense of both dread and fascination that I had come to associate with my new home. Back at the cabin, life continued in its blend of hard work and quiet introspection. Mike and I began to install rudimentary cameras around the perimeter of the property, hoping to capture any evidence of the spectral happenings that I had begun to record in my journal. Although he maintained a veneer of skepticism, I could see that even Mike was unnerved by the unexplained phenomena. A shadow flitting past in the twilight here, a strange noise in the dead of night there. I spent countless hours reviewing the footage, each grainy image and distorted sound a puzzle piece in a mystery that seemed to defy resolution. One video clip, taken on a particularly clear night, showed a vague, blurred figure that moved along the edge of the woods with an almost deliberate gait, a figure that vanished as soon as I tried to focus on it. I felt a chill of recognition, as though I were witnessing a fragment of a long-forgotten legend brought briefly into the present. Amid these eerie occurrences, my own inner life began to change in ways I hadn't anticipated. I found solace in the slow, meditative rhythm of rural living, the steady tasks of tending to a small garden, repairing the old cabin, and even the simple act of listening to the wind through the pines. My nights were filled with the quiet murmur of nature, punctuated by moments of inexplicable beauty, and, at times, a profound sense of loneliness. I began to wonder if the legends of the Pine Barrens, the tales of the Jersey Devil and other spectral beings, were not merely frightful fictions, but echoes of something real, something that resonated with the deepest parts of the human soul. Perhaps, I thought, the dark mysteries of this land were not meant to be conquered or understood in a conventional sense, but accepted as an intrinsic part of life's tapestry, a reminder that even in the wildest darkness there is a spark of something eternal. One night, after a long, rain-soaked day that left the world outside my window a blur of dripping leaves and shimmering puddles, I sat alone on the back porch, wrapped in a threadbare blanket. The storm had passed, leaving behind a silence so deep it seemed to press against my eardrums. In that hush, I heard a sound that made me shudder, a guttural, almost guttural moan that seemed to rise from the very ground beneath the cabin. It was not the sound of wind or water, but something more primal, more visceral, a sound that resonated with a sense of ancient anger and sorrow. My heart pounded as I fumbled for my recorder, desperate to capture the sound, to preserve it as evidence that there was more to this land than mere superstition. I pressed record and listened as the moan ebbed and flowed, a sound that made my blood run cold, even as it stirred something deep within me, a strange mixture of fear, awe, and a longing to understand. In the days that followed that terrifying night, I immersed myself in every scrap of lore I could find about the Pine Barrens. I combed through old newspapers at the local library, talked to longtime residents in hushed tones at the town diner, and pored over online archives of ghost stories and legends. One recurring theme emerged: the legend of the Jersey Devil, a creature of fire and shadow, part beast and part specter, said to roam these wild lands with a ferocity that defied the natural order. Though I had never truly believed in such tales, the evidence I had gathered, those inexplicable sounds, the blurred figures captured on camera, the inexplicable symbols carved into old trees, began to erode the boundary between myth and reality in my mind. I recall a particularly intense afternoon when I sat with Mike and Mr. O'Connor at a rickety table outside a rundown convenience store on the outskirts of a small town. The three of us shared stories over cups of bitter coffee, the conversation weaving between skepticism and reluctant acceptance. Mr. O'Connor, with a deep, rumbling voice that carried the weight of decades spent in the wild, told us, "The pines are old, and they remember. They remember every sorrow, every triumph, every lost soul. And sometimes they give voice to that memory in ways that can chill you to the bone." His eyes, dark and reflective, met mine with a silent understanding that the land itself was a living archive of all that had come before. I felt that truth deep in my bones, a truth that the spirits of the Pine Barrens were not just tales to scare children, but a part of the raw, untamed reality of this place. As autumn faded into winter, the mysteries of the Pine Barrens grew ever more intimate. I spent countless nights on the porch, sometimes alone, sometimes with Mike, sometimes with Mr. O'Connor if he happened to drop by, listening to the symphony of the night, the rustling of the pines, the distant cry of a lone owl, and the occasional unexplainable sound that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up in silent warning. I began to document these moments meticulously, writing down every detail, every nuance, every whisper of a sound that I couldn't quite place. My journal became a sacred text, a record of my journey into the heart of a land where the past and present mingled in a delicate dance of shadow and light. One bitterly cold night, when the wind whipped through the barren landscape with a ferocity that seemed to strip the very color from the world, I experienced something that I will never forget. I was out on the back porch, bundled in layers of wool and leather, trying to stave off the biting chill, when I saw a flicker of movement at the edge of the tree line. It was a flash of red, a brief, almost imperceptible glow that seemed to pulse with life against the dark silhouette of the pines. I blinked, and the light was gone, swallowed up by the darkness, but then it reappeared, this time brighter, more insistent, as if trying to convey a message. I followed its direction with trembling steps, my recorder clutched in my hand, until I reached a clearing where the snow lay undisturbed except for a series of erratic, long tracks that seemed to lead toward an ancient, gnarled oak. I knelt down and examined the tracks. They were unlike anything I'd seen before. Deep, irregular impressions in the snow, as if made by a creature both massive and otherworldly. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized that I was not alone in my quest for understanding. The Pine Barrens were revealing themselves in ways that were both beautiful and terrifying. The following morning, I recounted the experience to Mike and Mr. O'Connor. Mike, ever the skeptic, tried to dismiss it as a trick of the light or an animal's erratic path through fresh snow, but I could see that even his hardened expression faltered for a moment. Mr. O'Connor merely nodded, his eyes distant as if recalling a memory he had long buried. "The pines have their own way of speaking," he murmured. "Sometimes they speak in signs and tracks that remind us that we are not in control, that the land holds secrets that no human can fully understand." His words resonated with me, echoing the unspoken truth I felt in every gust of wind and every flicker of light. As winter deepened, my life in the Pine Barrens became an intricate tapestry of ordinary routines and extraordinary mysteries. I continued my daily chores, chopping wood, tending a small vegetable patch that somehow managed to sprout amidst the frost, and maintaining the meager off-grid power system, while my nights were devoted to the quiet, painstaking work of observation and documentation. My journal grew thick with entries detailing every unusual sound, every odd reflection in the snow, every inexplicable movement caught on the grainy footage of my old camera. I wrote of the feeling of being watched, of the way the wind carried voices that seemed to murmur names and warnings, and of the persistent, almost hypnotic pull of the Pine Barrens that drew me deeper into its hidden lore. In the midst of this quiet investigation, I began to feel a transformation within myself. The rigid, controlled world I had left behind was giving way to a more fluid, mysterious existence, where uncertainty was not a source of anxiety, but a wellspring of inspiration. I found that the beauty of the Pine Barrens lay not just in its stark landscapes and untamed forests, but in its ability to evoke emotions that I had long suppressed: loneliness, wonder, even a kind of bittersweet hope. My art, which had once been a mere hobby, now became an essential expression of the inner journey I was undertaking. I painted with a fervor that surprised even me, capturing the interplay of light and shadow, the stark contrast between the soft hues of a winter dawn and the deep, unfathomable black of night. Each brush stroke was a meditation on the fragile boundary between the seen and the unseen, a silent dialogue with a land that was as much a part of my soul as it was a place of solitude. There were moments, too, of quiet communion with the spectral elements of the Pine Barrens. On one particularly clear night, when the sky was a vast canvas of stars and the cold air sparkled with the promise of frost, I found myself sitting on the porch, the silence around me profound and almost sacred. I closed my eyes and listened to the wind, letting it carry away the remnants of my old life, the noise of the city and the clamor of technology, until I was left with nothing but the soft, persistent murmur of the forest. In that stillness, I could almost feel the presence of something, or someone, watching over me, a gentle, guiding force that seemed to affirm that I was exactly where I was meant to be. I opened my eyes to find Mike standing a few feet away, his expression softened by the same wonder I felt. "Carla," he said quietly, "maybe we're not just in the Pine Barrens. We're part of them now." His words, spoken in the silence of that starry night, carried a truth that resonated deep within me. In time, the uncanny occurrences became less frequent, but never entirely disappeared. I learned to live with the mystery, to accept that there were forces at work beyond my understanding, forces that whispered in the rustle of the pines, flickered in the distant glow on a snowy night, and left subtle tracks in the frozen ground. I realized that the legend of the Jersey Devil, so often bandied about in local lore, was just one thread in a vast tapestry of myth and memory that permeated these lands. the Pine Barrens, with their vast expanses and unyielding wilderness, were a repository of the world's forgotten stories, a place where every shadow, every whisper, held the echo of lives long past and dreams never realized. Now, as I sit in the quiet solitude of my reclaimed life in the Pine Barrens, I find that I have grown into the mystery rather than being consumed by it. My days are filled with a gentle rhythm of work and reflection, of capturing fleeting moments on canvas and in words. I still venture out into the dark, searching for signs and listening for voices that may carry the echoes of ancient sorrow. Yet, I do so with a sense of reverence rather than fear, knowing that the land does not seek to harm me but to remind me of a deeper truth, that our lives are intertwined with the past, and that even in the face of inexplicable mystery, there is a profound beauty to be found. Each day, as I step outside into the cool, whispering air of a new dawn, I am reminded that my journey here was not an escape from my former life, but an embrace of a more authentic, if uncertain, existence. The Pine Barrens have taught me that it is not the absence of mystery that brings peace, but the acceptance of it, the understanding that some questions are meant to remain unanswered, and that in that ambiguity lies the very essence of life. I continue to document my experiences in my journal, to paint the scenes that move me, and to listen to the soft, enduring murmur of the wilderness. Mike, ever the pragmatic soul, still grumbles about the strange noises and flickers of light, but even he has come to appreciate the raw, unfiltered truth of this place, a truth that speaks in a language older than words, and more enduring than any single moment. Looking back now, I see that my decision to leave behind the sterile corridors of corporate life and embrace the enigmatic, untamed beauty of the Pine Barrens was not a leap of blind faith, but a quiet revolution, a reclaiming of my own spirit from the clutches of modernity, and the rediscovery of a world where nature and myth coexist in delicate harmony. I have come to know the Pine Barrens as both a muse and a mirror, reflecting back to me the fragments of my own past, the sorrows I have borne, and the hope that still flickers in even the darkest of nights. This is my account, a record of a journey into the heart of the unknown, where the line between reality and myth blurs into a soft, enduring tapestry of memory and wonder. I remain here, not because I have all the answers, but because I have learned to find beauty in uncertainty, and to embrace the whispers of the past as a guiding light for the future. And as I continue to live each day in the silent company of ancient pines and restless legends, I know that I have found a place that is truly home, a place where every rustle of wind, every shadow that dances on the forest floor, and every fleeting glimpse of the spectral light is a reminder that life, in all its mysterious glory, is a story that is still being written.